Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Can we get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Please vote. Okay, Superintendent Koba, A3. First, we're going to talk about the report on the Governor's May revise.
Yes, thank you, President Buera. What I'd like to do is ask Bernie and our guest from Sacramento to update us on a lot of what's going on, and there are some significant changes in the last 48, 72 hours. So it's a two-part presentation. First, to give you the bigger view of the May revise and the legislative impacts, Bernie and Monica, and then to go directly into impacts to San Diego Unified with Phil and the CFO team. Bernie?
Board President, members of the board, I'm going to let Monica do the bulk of this presentation. I just wanted to give you some introductory remarks. As Bill said, there are things going on as we speak in Sacramento. I mentioned to a couple of you, but one thing that you hear tonight is about the special education allocation. Ms. Nakamura was up there on Monday working on that. Well, since then, today the Assembly Budget Committee met on that and actually reached a resolution that's positive for us. As we speak, the Senate Budget Committee is meeting, and we've been trying to get a hold of Senator Duchenne to let her know our position. We've had the Superintendent Randy Ward call her. Chula Vista has called her. We've sent emails to her Chief of Staff. We've done about everything we can this afternoon, and so we're waiting to hear what happens in the Senate. The Senate staff member has recommended to do away with this special allocation. So it's different than what the Assembly have. If that happens, then it will have to be conferenced, and it will be much more difficult for us to come up with a budget because we won't know. We wanted to get this resolved, and we may know by the end of the board meeting. We'll let you know. We'll watch on the internet and see. But that's going on. So that's just an example of how difficult this is. And I think, Ms. Nakamura, your work with all the other districts is something we ought to continue. And I think if we could put together a letter from our board and signed by all the other districts, we need to do that here in the next couple of days and get that up there next week. So that's just an example of how this thing is in flux, changing. Monica has put together a presentation for you that will kind of walk you through some of the issues. So with no further ado, I'll let her come up and go through. Thank you.
Bernie, I'd like to point out that this means this is $9 million for the San Diego Unified. 18 million.
Yeah, twice.
2 years. Okay, so 9 million plus. Great.
Hello, board members, Superintendent Koba. My name is Monica Nestrosa. I'm the Director of Government Relations in Sacramento, so I have the pleasure of representing the district up there, but also a tough job because, as I'm going to, lay forth, the budget situation, while a bit improved, is still not at the place where we had hoped, and there's a lot of difficult decisions that lie ahead. But I'm excited to be here because I think that we have shown in the past that when we've been able to work together, we've been able to see some results and better the district's financial position. And hopefully this meeting can sort of lead us into some of that work for the future. So I'm going to start off with the projected deficit. As you'll see on the chart, I go back about a year, so we can look at July 2009. At that point, the last budget had been adopted, and shortly thereafter, it was supposed to be a balanced budget, but almost immediately thereafter, it was out of balance by $7.4 billion. In the months that followed before 2009 ended, pretty much every time we looked at the news, whenever the Department of Finance or the State Treasurer's Office released something new, the situation was worse. And you can see it climbed very quickly to $16 billion, and then it reached its peak in November of 2009 at $20 billion. By the time we'd started then entering the new year in January 2010, we started stabilizing a bit. The next, budget update that we got was very much within the same range. In January, we were supposed to start making mid-year corrections as a state. So the state had said, we want to get a head start on the budget. We want to do some budget savings, pretty much what our board does, trying to think how can we curb some spending mid-year so that we can be in a better position as we look at our next year budget. I have to say, you as a board have done much better than the state. the state, their mid-year corrections only amounted to a diminishment in the deficit of about $800 million, which, given the enormity of the problem, unfortunately was not very much. There had been the hope in Sacramento that revenue numbers would be much better. There had been the hope that income taxes would come in higher, and for a while there was some numbers that suggested that that might be the case. But in April, our cash receipts as a state came in very low, and so we ended up with an enormous problem. In terms of the budget, there are always two sides that I think it's important to look at. One is the overall deficit, but the other is cash. And the reason cash is so important is because historically, school districts have been asked to pick up the burden so that when the state isn't able to manage its cash, it doesn't have enough money to meet its payroll obligations, it says, who can I borrow from short term? And the answer typically is schools. So right now the state is in a good cash position. The state controller's office expects that they'll be in a good cash position through the early summer. And that's because they've deferred billions more from schools this year. So the state's healthy cash position comes at our expense. By the late summer, however, it's unclear whether or not the state's cash position will stay as strong. In particular, if a budget doesn't come together by July or August, the state controller is predicting that the summer drought in cash receipts will mean that they may need to look at either IOUs or additional deferrals. And so the Legislative Analyst's Office has also echoed this sentiment, and it's something that we need to be watchful for, because if we need to borrow more, then those are interest costs that our district picks up and that eats into our funds, and it also creates a lot of uncertainty in areas of our budget.
Monica, let's make it clear that when that cash is deferred, we have to purchase trans notes for bridge financing, right?
That's
so that's additional cost too. They're not just taking money out of our bank account. We have to borrow money, which means that's money we're not using for musical instruments or whatever else it is that we care about.
That's right. Science speakers, any instructional materials in the classroom, that's where it comes from. Marching band uniforms as well. And I think one important note, if I can make an editorial comment, and it's one that we've been trying to press at the Capitol, the state does reimburse local governments for the interest that they pay on their bridge financing. That's a commitment that they've made to local government. That's not a commitment that they've made to schools. And I think that's something that needs to change. And we've tried to highlight the discrepancy. You're going to see there's a whole lot of issues to work on, and we're going to have to pick some of the ones that are core and central to us. But I certainly think, given how high the credit card is being driven up with schools, that at some point the dollar amount for the interest may become significant enough that this gets bumped up to a higher priority.
This is a complication on a couple levels. We're going to ask you to approve the trans annual loan next business meeting on the 8th. If that combined with the state continuing to defer payments further into the new fiscal year, that's a shortage of money in our pocket plus a higher interest rate for the trans. And the state only has a handful of mandatory required allocations they can't defer. One of them is special ed, but the rest, to some degree, can continue to be pushed past August into September. Typically, this is a tremendous burden on smaller districts with smaller reserves, but sooner or later it gets all of us. The longer it goes and the deeper the deferral.
That's exactly
but isn't it my understanding is that the interest we pay on trans notes right now is $3.8 million a year, correct?
Current year was $3.8 million. Last year it was over $6 million. We were able to borrow less because of the ARA dollars that we had.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's a particular issue of mine.
Right.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you.
No, that's an important point. So now to look ahead at the May revision that was released by the governor on May 14th. It's something that you've read about in the press. This is just a quick overview to note that the governor balances his budget primarily with cuts. As you can see on the slide, that represents almost 2/3 of his entire budget solution. He did adjust his federal funds projection to something that's more reasonable. People at this point think $3.4 billion is about what we should be in line to receive. There's also some loans and shifts and some new revenue. To be honest, the new revenue is very minimal. There were a couple of proposals, like for instance, $100 million in a property insurance fee for those who are at higher risk of fires to be able to pay for that, but really very, very minimal new revenue. So what happens when you have a cut budget? Well, there's a lot of things that get cut. Some of the things that stand out in particular, in addition to K-12 education that has been cut over the years, include CalWORKs. The governor is proposing to cut CalWORKs by $1.2 billion, which would essentially dismantle the program. There's also a proposed cut of $1.45 billion to child care. That does impact the district, and we'll be discussing that further. But it also impacts a lot of families that need child care in order to go to work. On the other side, however, and this was somewhat unexpected, there were some things that were saved. What was saved in the budget in the May revision relative to what was in January, there were a couple of things. I've chosen to highlight two. The first is the Healthy Families Program, which serves young, low-income children. And in that case, it was saved because the governor felt, as did many, that given the health care reform that had passed, that wasn't something that could be implemented. On the other hand, you have higher education. Higher education had been something that had been on the bubble. And the way the governor had framed it in January, he said, if federal funds don't come through, then something that will get cut is higher education. In his January budget, he had said, I'm going to increase their funding about 11% year over year. So they receive an extra $1.2 billion relative to last year. And he said, if federal funds don't come through, then I won't be able to make that increase, and they're going to see a cut. In fact, even though the federal funds did not come through in the entirety of his initial estimate, he did preserve this 11% increase to higher education. He also saved Cal Grants and other things, and has really, I think, taken the position that that's his legacy, that he wants to be known for preserving higher education in particular. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the child care proposal because it is of particular importance and it's very timely. His proposal is to eliminate preschool programs pretty much. So the programs that serve our youngest students as they're getting ready for school. He has made some exceptions, and that's the Part Day State Preschool Program, and he's also said that some center-based funding will also be saved. Now, the difficulty, and some of this may be mentioned by our budget office staff as well, is that there's a lot of uncertainty about what it means. The governor, when he puts out his May revision, doesn't put out an entire budget document as he does in January that's very, very detailed and that has budget bit language. He submits what are called May revision letters. So you have a letter that may be 2 pages, and it says, I want to make an adjustment, and it says, this is the budget line item, which is a state budget line item, and it says, this is the money I want to take. So in this case, we have a letter that says line item 6110-196-001 is going to be cut by $1.45 billion. Well, the immediate question that I got from our budget office is, what does that mean? That's, that's not very helpful for figuring out what it means and really being able to identify the problem at the local level. Well, we've run into problems, and I'd like to share with you a little bit of that because it may serve as helpful context when the budget office comes up. The problem is that at the very highest level of the Department of Finance, they're just in charge of giving you the number that they're going to cut. They're the ones who are working to get to zero, right? Next, you have a state agency, which is the Department of Education, that's actually the one that implements cuts much more. They're the ones that distribute the funding to school districts, so they're also the ones that typically make the adjustments and tell you, in this account, because you get money in preschool programs, there's, more than 5 different accounts that we receive funding from. So they're supposed to tell us, for this account, you'll get about this percentage of a cut or this amount of a cut per student, and go through and give us that detail. Well, the Department of Education does not believe that child care in the end will be cut. And so they, at this point, have taken the position that they are not releasing details on how the governor's budget would be implemented. There's some reasons for this, that may be a logical position to take, and I've outlined the legislative response as part of that context, which is that the Democrats immediately came out and opposed this proposal. I have to say I wish that Democrats had come out with such vehemence to oppose K-12 education cuts, but That aside, they did hold emergency hearings, which is unprecedented. They shifted meetings, for instance, for the State Allocation Board, which gives out money for school facilities. That meeting got postponed. A lot of things got moved around just so that they could hold an emergency hearing to reject the governor's proposals. Given that, the State Department of Education position is somewhat defensible, perhaps, but it leaves districts in limbo. And I've sort of surveyed my colleagues in other districts to find out what they're doing. At LA Unified, they're not planning on implementing any cuts at this point, although their county office has recommended to them that they do so. I've spoken to some county... Yes. I should mention I've spoken to the county offices, to their statewide association, and asked them if they've released recommendations. At this point, there's no statewide recommendation from county offices. It's varying from county office to county office. In some cases, I should mention, some county offices run child development centers themselves, and so they're being hit with the same cut and uncertainty as we are. Some of those counties that have particularly large numbers are saying maybe we should give you some more time, whereas some of the counties that maybe have less child development centers are being a little bit more aggressive and asking for mid-year corrections to the budget. In either case, I think it's important for us, and I will continue to try to press the state to make sure we get more clarity around what the cuts exactly are. But I should mention that even if we do not see funding to child care restored, or if we do see funding for child care restored, the question then becomes, where is that money going to come from? You increase, funding $1.4 billion, and you need to get to zero. So somewhere that money needs to appear. And I think there's a very good chance that people could look to K-12 for that. Given historically what has happened, whenever they need a balancer, it seems easy to skim off $1 billion from K-12 education. It's not going to dismantle, in their minds, it's not going to dismantle public education. We can still open our doors. And so there's some concern that in essence they may be pitting us against ourselves. And it's just something to think through. The other big May revision issue is the continued and increasing underfunding of Proposition 98 for the budget year. The Proposition 98 guarantee is really sensitive to revenues, so the number, is fluid and varies, every time we get new revenue updates. It's at around 52.5 to 53 billion, maybe even a little bit higher than 53 billion, but it's somewhere in that range. In the January proposal, the governor proposed funding it at about $50 billion, which obviously is less than the guarantee to schools. In the May revision, he proposes to do two things to further lower the guarantee. One of them is to eliminate child care, and then he says, and since I'm eliminating child care, now I don't have to count it towards the 98 guarantee. So if I take out child care, now the guarantee lowers accordingly. It's something that in Sacramento is called rebenching. And there's been a lot of questions about it. Legally, it doesn't seem to pass the giggle test. If we were to take out mathematics, can we rebench Proposition 98? If we were to take out, PE, can you rebench Proposition 98 accordingly? It doesn't exactly follow, but that's his argument. The second argument he makes for why he can lower the guarantee to schools is that we actually fought really hard a couple of months ago, and our PTA delegation, when they were in Sacramento, actually did a huge push around this, which is the governor and the legislature during the special session did make one mid-year correction of about $1.4 billion, and that was the gas tax swap, to change something from a sales tax to an excise tax. And what we fought for in San Diego, and what our parents were up there lobbying elected officials as well on, was if you switch from a sales tax to an excise tax, you still need to make sure that money counts towards Proposition 98. And we were successful, and we got that language in there, which was good. But now the governor turns around and says, well, but I'm not going to honor that. So there goes another $600 million that he's saying he can take away from the Proposition 98 guarantee. In in addition to this, there's sort of the more general big picture manipulation attempts. And I almost don't know how much time to spend on these because we see these so often. But I think it's worth noting, especially the first. For financial year, for the last fiscal year, for 2008-2009, the state basically had been making, over the past 18 months, some just enormous, dramatic cuts. And at that point, they decided, we're coming together, we're going to make a massive set of cuts to K-12 education. We are going to codify into law the fact that we owe you, and that we owe you by $11.2 billion. So we don't have any money, but at the very least, we can tell you that we're going to pay you back once we do have the money. That was the promise that was made. Now the governor proposes to go back and to uncertify, basically to break the promise that was made to students, to schools in law, and that's his first manipulation. Then, the others pale in comparison, but the other is, for the current year, he says, even though he's underfunding education, he claims that he's overfunding education, and therefore the amount that he's overfunding, he says, is money that he owes us, that now he's already paying us in advance, even though I think most of us would argue that repayment should come when it's actually additive, rather than when it's supplanting the money that we should be receiving anyway. And then lastly, for the next budget year are the lowering of the guarantee, which I described in the previous slide, the gas tax swap, and the child care rebenching. So this gets to I think one of the more important parts, which is to figure out what we're going to do as a district. We're the second largest district in the state. We have members of our delegation in key positions. And I think there were sort of three priorities that I saw shaping up, but would appreciate feedback as we refine this and as we move forward. The first is obviously to protect K-12 education from further cuts or deferrals. The cuts that we've taken have already been devastating, and the idea that we're always first in line for deferrals and could take an additional hit, like Bill said, typically deferrals are something that small districts care about. At this point, big districts are caring about it too, and we need to be pushing back and making sure that we're not the balancer, that we're not the ones that always have to get their cash deferred, but that really constitutionally, as our board members know from the CSBA lawsuit, education is supposed to be the first appropriation, the first funding priority according to the state constitution, and that's something that the state should be living up to. The second has to do with the Proposition 98 guarantee repayment, and that's the $11.2 billion. And the governor, as I mentioned, has said that in essence he wants to break the promise. The stakes are really high in that case. It's $11.2 billion statewide. San Diego's a large district. Our share is about $220 million. It's all supposed to come in revenue limits, so it's all flexible dollars. It's all dollars that we can spend for our highest priorities, whatever those might be. And it's a fair share. It goes out on a per-student basis. And I think there's a lot of, obviously this is something that everyone sort of agrees on, but it's something that's important to hold people to. Because
and it's ongoing revenue as well, correct? Yeah.
That's right. So it's built into our base.
Yeah.
And, as a lot of people have noticed, Proposition 98 can be manipulated. The one thing that historically has just held at least some kind of floor for us is that when there are good years, the maintenance factor forces the state to invest in us. And if you take away, if we let them break their promise to our school children, to the families in San Diego, then that means that, we're not going to be repaid. That promise needs to remain in state law, and if we let them take it away, I think there will be parties that will sue. But I think to have to take it to the courts, to have that distraction, to not have that certainty for a while, it's just not worth it. That's something we should be able to win without litigation, I think. The third priority, which maybe in some ways, I guess it came off as number one again, maybe because it's the second number one priority, is to make sure that San Diego's treated fairly. And I think that's an issue that this board has discussed and knows that it's important that all cuts are fair. If they're going to, cuts are going to happen. I don't think anyone thinks that there's not going to be any cuts. But there's some cuts that could hurt our district a lot more, and there's ways that they could be done that could be actually equitable across the state. We also have our class size reduction bill, and then there's the special education funding issue that Bernie mentioned. And I'm going to go through each one now, piece by piece. So on the proportionality of the reductions, as you know, urban school districts are sometimes seen as the big kid in the schoolyard. And sometimes that means that people think, oh, well, you guys have it easy. You have a big school district. You can balance your budget easier. You guys can take more cuts. Shortly after I started, just a couple of weeks, the state actually voted to make pretty heavy cuts to the desegregation funding. And that meant San Diego Unified lost about $20 more per student than on average school districts across the state. It was a huge hit. And my job since I started, has been that will not happen while I am here. And I think that's a commitment that all of you as board members have too. On our watch, that will not happen. So the first question, the two issues that I've been looking at are, one, are the cuts going to come to revenue limits or categoricals? The Legislative Analyst's Office has been proposing cuts to categoricals primarily. They, in their defense, their logic is, categoricals, those are restricted funds. School districts want more unrestricted funds, so let's just cut the restricted funds. And they don't think about as much what the impact is, sort of district by district, and that's not equitable. So the LAO puts forward their proposal, and that's fine, but it's important for us to make sure we continue to educate our delegation on the fact that we already took disproportionate hits, that was extremely unfair to our kids, and that shouldn't happen again. Secondly, there's an issue that has come up regarding how, if it's a revenue limit cut, how it will be apportioned. And something that I'll mention, and this will be, most of you as board members will know, but for the public I think it might be helpful to provide as background, is that not all districts receive the same amount of funding per ADA. In fact, the school districts that receive the most funding per ADA are high school districts because they're seen as having potentially higher needs, differentiated instruction, etc. Unified school districts receive about somewhere in the middle, and then the ones that receive the least per student are elementary school districts. Well, as the state has been looking at how to make the cuts, the governor's proposal was actually one that was positive. It was to make sure that all districts were cut proportionally. So you got the same percentage cut. It was about 3.85%, I believe. And that meant that every school district would have to cut its budget about 3.85%. If you got more funds because you had higher needs, you would get cut, something proportional as a smaller school or an elementary school district. Well, since then, there's been a movement afoot to try to change that and to have what they call equitable being a flat rate of about $250 per ADA. Now, the difference is huge for San Diego Unified if you do it on a percentage basis or if you do it on a flat number basis, because we're a unified school district. So we don't receive as much as some of the other school districts do per student, even on a revenue limit basis. And as a unified school district, and I think this is something we're, again, reaching out, like Bernie mentioned, to other districts in the region. For any unified school district, this proposal that's starting to gain some traction to move to a flat rate would prove devastating, because it would mean that our calculation of what the revenue limit cut would be would suddenly have been too small. And actually, the cut that we would take to our revenue limit would be significantly higher. And so this is something that's very emergent still, but my understanding is that county offices are starting to take it seriously. And given the momentum, even though it is not part of the governor's budget, given the momentum, some county offices, not all, but some are starting to ask that school districts actually change to show the deficit for next year based on a flat rate revenue limit cut. Again, if that's the case for San Diego Unified, that would be a huge hit because we would be hit disproportionately. On a percentage basis, we would receive a greater cut than other school districts.
Do you have any ability now to calculate what that difference would be?
I'll defer to our budget office. I think that's something that's important for us to do as we look forward on our advocacy priorities. Okay. A flat rate is worse for us because it actually ends up being a higher percentage of our ADA. So on a proportional basis, if we were to cut our revenue limits by about 3.85%, that comes out to, I believe, about $231 per student. If you cut us at a flat rate, we end up picking the cost for a lower percentage cut in a lot of other districts, and that means our flat rate cut is $252 per student. So it's about, again, another $20 per student disproportionate cut.
If I could add, Monica, this has been discussed off and on with a lot of uncertainty for a number of months. And then all of a sudden, now in the 11th hour, this is coming up and gaining some interest. And it truly is another way they're going to ding the large unifieds.
I apologize, this has been a bit slow. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit. On class,
really
It's been good. You're fine.
okay. On class size reduction, the assembly bill that we introduced, AB 2272, and again, this is where board involvement pays off a lot. We were able to get 4 co-authors from our delegation. It's bipartisan. Mr. Block and Mr. Fletcher have taken the lead as joint authors. Ms. Salas and Ms. Saldaña have signed on as co-authors. It was introduced in February. We were successful based on Bernie's advocacy as well as the advocacy of our parents, our teachers, and our principals in getting it out of Assembly Education, the first policy committee. And now we're scheduled for a vote tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for appropriations. It is, I have to be honest, a very heavy lift. The cost limit in appropriations is $50,000. The potential quote-unquote loss in savings to the state, because the state wouldn't be able to force us from using our class size reduction money, is being estimated around $100 million or so. And there are very few exceptions. However, I think we have done a good work. We've tried to build the support both in leadership. Mr. Block and Mr. Fletcher have done a great job of talking to their colleagues, of underscoring the importance of continuing to invest in small class sizes. And I think there's still hope, but we'll have a better report tomorrow. We also are continuing our ongoing negotiations with stakeholders. Again, the work that's been done locally, the California Teachers Association and the California PTA are typically 2 organizations that have opposed bills like ours, but it's because of the work that has come from the bottom up where they've been able to explain how these are extraordinary circumstances, why penalties should be relaxed just in a very tight time frame. We've been able to at least have them go as neutral and not have the opposition. We've also been working with Riverside, the school business officials who have switched from opposition to support. It's been a long time in building, but I think we're developing the momentum that we need. Lastly, I'm going to focus on the issue of the special disabilities adjustment. It's an important one to us. There's about $70 million in funding total for school districts across the state. And it's money that's supposed to come to districts that have higher concentrations of students with high-cost disabilities. Those are students who are autistic, students who have multiple disabilities, who are blind, or who are visual, or who are deaf. And these students need special services. They need Braille books and other accommodations in order to be successful in the classroom. It was an issue that was mentioned, I believe, by parents at the last school board meeting, precisely how critical these services are. And yet, even as we're hearing from parents by how much more we need to provide their children, the state right now is potentially looking at the elimination of this funding. And San Diego receives $9 million per year. This is extremely critical to us because we would both lose the funding for the current year, even though we've already received 70% of the funds and spent those. The state would ask for them back at this point in time, 5 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, and then there's also the $9 million for the budget year.
This has been budgeted.
This has been budgeted.
And we've spent most of it.
And I don't know if your question was also not just by the district, Catherine, but also as we discussed when you were in Sacramento, it's been budgeted by the state.
Yeah.
This money's in the
That's
state
what I
budget.
meant.
Yeah.
It's not something
us,
that costs the state. Yeah. And anything additional than what they've planned for. In fact, it's required that they spend this money because the state also has a federal maintenance of effort requirement for its special education funding, and this is part of what it counts towards that. So if it doesn't spend this money on special education, then there's all kinds of compliance questions. Now we cannot receive the funding without urgency legislation because the sunset expired. And so we've been working with, thanks to Catherine, a number of other school districts in the county. But it's incredibly important for us that we, I think, zero in on Senator Duchesne. We've worked really well with the Assembly members, both in our delegation and then also at the speaker's level and in Budget Committee. They've all said, in fact, this morning they signed on and said, this funding is critical, we're going to authorize this. However, the Senate staff recommendation was to eliminate it. And so I think it's important. I'm not sure that the Senate staff correctly communicated to Senator Duchesne the importance that this is, not just for San Diego Unified, but I was on the phone today with Chula Vista's business officer, and other, I talked with the South County SELPA director, and they're all saying their budgets would be devastated, not to mention their ability to serve these students would be severely devastated.
I have a group of parents with autistic children that I can contact, and we can raise hell. So tomorrow. Okay.
And Monica, the folks who were saying, not to renew this funding, would that just be $70 million that's cut out of education, or it's money that's somehow distributed to districts with?
Here's what they want to do. They're saying, and so I didn't mention this in my context, but this funding, the adjustment comes about based on a study that was done about a decade ago. And a decade ago, they did a survey and said, where are these students with high needs concentrated? And that then became an adjustment that has continued, right?
Yeah.
And there was a long sunset. Well, what happened is there is a staff person who believes that the adjustment isn't correct, that there may be some school districts that should get more funding, or that maybe their concentration of students has changed over the years. That's something that I think is really legitimate and needs to be looked at. I certainly think it's a good question to be asking. I think our response has been, there's a matter of timing here.
Yeah.
And notice.
And this isn't about, if we talked about what in Sacramento terms is called budget year plus one, so that's 11-12. This were about starting a conversation about 2011-12 and saying, how do we look at making sure all districts are treated fairly? And, if that includes adjusting and maybe some districts getting a little bit more or a little bit less, let's have that conversation. I think we should be open to that. But the problem is that this staff person who works for Senator Duchesne wants to have that conversation happen in the next 5 weeks and potentially change the allocation for districts at a severe amount. The other problem that I would mention with the proposal is that if there's no better data to use than the one that we collected 10 years ago, then what do we use in its place? The idea is that the default is just to give it out on a per ADA basis. Well, that doesn't make sense. There's some districts that just have more autistic kids, there are some districts that have more blind children, and that have higher costs. And if you spread it out on a per ADA basis, in essence what you're doing is ripping money out of our budget to give it to another, and you're going to have a lot of real big losers. And one of the most impacted districts would be ours because we have a lot of good hospitals in the region. And so parents of children who have these high needs oftentimes come to metropolitan areas where they know their child can be taken care of, not only well provided good services at the school, but also health services in the region.
Yeah, a couple of things to add here. This is a 10-year-old study. I think if you looked at San Diego Unified in the last decade, you will see that our special admission has grown, become more complicated, and in this decade, the Navy has designated us as one of its only 2 home ports as a special needs, family-centric home port. because they have the Naval Hospital at Pendleton and down at Balboa treating those. So we have a 10% military population and a disproportionate number of special needs kids in that population, in addition to what we have in the district as a whole. So 10-year studies, I would say we have information that would validate that that's where we are.
I can understand rolling things over until you get a study, but I think the real solution is to send the money according to disability. And to go ahead and do that, see, then once that law or that kind of organization plan is in place, what you do is you identify the kids and get the money according to their high cost identification instead of having some 10-year-old study be the issue. So if we roll it over and we study it again and we get a new, call it a new demographic analysis, we'll still be wrong because the concept is wrong because it's based on a snapshot in time. What it should be is based on actual need each year, and you should be able to identify with your IEPs what the disabilities are, or the 504s. And if we have a legislature that doesn't understand that, I guess that's too bad. But then we'll be in this. Let's say we manage to deal with this and get our $9 million. That doesn't solve the real ongoing problem of where does the money go per disability. I've always said that we ought to be costing out disabilities and have a cost accounting format because one single disability can cost us $25,000 a year when we're getting some average amount for our special ed kids. Special ed kids aren't average, so then they use averages, and that's the mistake. And it was made 10 years ago.
Well, and I think you raise an important point, which we've been trying to raise in Sacramento, that is, if you're going to look at the formula or the distribution of some special ed funds, you should look at the distribution of all special ed funds. Special ed funds right now are given on a per ADA basis. The vast majority. I mean, this adjustment is just a tiny amount. So I think, actually, if San Diego and other districts were to, in fact, say, well, let's go ahead and open up the whole special ed funding, I think the amount that we would receive would much better reflect the needs and costs of our student in the district. But I will say, disappointingly, the staff person who is pushing this issue at this point doesn't want to have that conversation about the overall, the larger issues that you've described, Mr. DeBeck. They, for whatever reason, seem to have latched on to this very small amount of funding and want to redistribute it. And so I think the comments that you've made are absolutely correct. If we're going to look at how funding is distributed, we should really do it well and comprehensively.
Then basically they stand to benefit from a formula because they get the money even though they don't have the need. It doesn't make sense.
That's right.
So the money should follow the kid. If they're disabled or have a handicap, and you can identify that serving that kid it costs so much and the services are worth so much, that's exactly what you ought to be doing. And it really is not the way educators think. Cost accounting is not what we think. We just want the money. Well, I think we ought to stop doing that and start using real rational ways to get the money because the law, even as it stands, is flawed. And if they're going to go threaten us, let's go back and fix the whole thing on principle. And instead of just on how the dollars affect San Diego. I suspect we're underwriting a lot of that, but that doesn't have anything to do with it. The real fact is if we are, we should get our money, and if we're not, we shouldn't.
That's right. I think in the immediate term, because we have about 5 weeks before the State Department of Education takes away $7 million that we've already received, we want an immediate solution to this. But I think you're absolutely right that we should be having the broader conversations at the same time as we're trying to fix a very immediate problem. Well, I can relate
to sweeping money away from places where it hasn't been spent, but I can't relate to taking the money away when you've already given it and it's spent. I mean, that's even worse.
It is. The very last slide, and I, again, apologize for going over, but some of the key questions as we look forward for what your budget will look like, how much funding we'll be able to have to provide an education for our school children. The first is what the overall size of the pie will be, what will be the revenues that will be available to the state to spend. The Democrats have introduced plans. The Assembly has a jobs budget, which relies primarily on borrowing, actually, and only a very small amount on taxing. And as of yet, the response that they've received from the Republicans is very cold. They've been told that borrowing isn't something that they want to do. At the same time, I think the Assembly version in some ways has a little bit more potential than maybe the Senate version, which does rely on taxing, in that borrowing is something that typically people understand, that you do during urgent times. The downside to the Assembly version, if you compare it to the Senate version, is that the Senate version, because it is a tax, it would be ongoing revenue. The Assembly version borrows, so in essence, it's one-time money. Now, that said, even though it's one-time money, my impression was if we're sinking, and you get a life vest and you're told it's only going to last you a day, it's not going to last you 3 days, I'll still take the life vest that's going to last me a day than none at all. So, there's merits to both. They're different packages. It's something we'll be monitoring and sending you updates on. Now, what the revenues will look like will also depend on how many votes are there for those kinds of packages. And the Republicans at this point have drawn a very hard line saying no new taxes, and they don't want a repeal of any taxes that are in line, tax breaks that are in line to take place. This is an election year for them. They are going up in primaries. They have had members who have voted for taxes that have seen recall elections, and so it would be very difficult for them to cross that line. That said, there's an issue of timing. Historically, if you look at budgets, when you see, and this is going back decades, when Republicans have been willing to vote for taxes, it's typically been when it's dragged out so long that they're termed out members, that having an appointment is maybe more important than having a political future, sort of through elected office. If that's to happen, that would mean the Democrats would need to hold out past September. I don't know if Democrats are willing to hold out past September, November, because obviously there's a lot of money that needs to be sent out for regions to be able to operate different programs. But it seems like the shorter timing there is on a budget, the more likely that there will be more cuts as a result. So, that's one of the factors. Then in terms of how much money will actually go to K-12, we've discussed in the past how Democrats have typically put Health and Human Services as their top priority. Those are important programs, but it's sort of been to the exclusion of looking out for K-12 very much. Typically, what they've given us are just the promises for the future. So we're going to cut you today, but at least we're going to, let you know that we're going to restore you that $11 billion in the future. Republicans this year, interestingly enough, are reaching out to education groups and saying, our messages are twofold. One, no new taxes, but the second one is, for the money that is available, we want it to go to K-12 education. And so we actually may have Republicans championing K-12 education funding in a way that's rather new. I mean, I think a number of members who belong to the Republican Party do care about K-12 education, but I haven't heard them perhaps lift up that issue as prominently as they are starting to do so now. Lastly, what will determine how the budget looks is the public the pressure that is built. There's a lot of groups, including, for instance, students in higher education that have done a great job of mobilizing. I think the work that's been done here in San Diego, in particular, in mobilizing families, school communities, has been impressive, and that needs to continue so that legislators have no doubt that if they balance the budget on school kids, that's going to be a bad decision. So, in closing, that's the presentation, but I welcome any questions you might have.
No questions, just thank you very much. It's very good.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, great.
Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the only thing that's happening in Sacramento is the grass is growing.
If that.
No, they're taking away our money. They've got their eye on our
they're
cash.
stealing. Yeah.
We're going to move on now to the impacts for San Diego Unified and where the CFO team, Phil and the staff are with presenting. And I think at this point we're trying to set the table for next week. We're proposing, and you'll see that later on, another budget discussion next week because of all of these late-breaking changes and how the board could assimilate the data tonight, move to a next Thursday for maybe some decision-making that then builds a first reading on the 8th of June. So I'd like to turn over to Phil right now.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent Koba, President Barrera, members of the board, good evening. And I'd like to move quickly through a presentation that I have for you tonight. I would also invite you to ask questions as we go through this so that we don't, hopefully I won't lose my train of thought, but I want to be responsive. And some people say my train left the station a long time ago, but hopefully I can stay focused and at the same time be a good servant to you in answering your questions. And to emphasize for tonight, a couple things. We have a lot of subject area experts here tonight to talk about the details of any particular questions that you may have. And our purpose tonight is to inform you, as Bill said, and we're not asking you to make any decisions. Tonight we would like to do that perhaps next week and the week after as we get prepared for June 8th as we present you a balanced budget. And as you've just had a great, terrific presentation on, we are receiving updates daily. Yesterday we were on the phone in conference calls with folks. Today we were on the phone with conference calls talking to the Department of Finance, trying to figure out the impact of everything that you were just told from a statewide perspective on San Diego Unified. And as Monica has told you, our responses from folks have been rather ambiguous, to say the least. We have not gotten clarity, but I can give you some things where we are being told where we have to include certain items in our budgets for you. And our goal is to really work. We have worked hard this week to identify solutions in collaboration with finance, HR, and academics. We have had SIOs and the academic folks in the room with us, and we're really trying hard not to do what we're doing in isolation, because that just alienates everyone and doesn't get any buy-in on the solutions. What we're looking at, based on primarily on what Monica just told you, a potential impact on San Diego Unified of $31.8 million in potential revenue loss if the perfect storm would happen to hit, where we would have a $4.8 million in revenue limit adjustment, as she described to you. Our county Department of Education has told us we must include that revenue limit adjustment in our budget. The dollars that you're going to see, the budget numbers that you're going to see at this point do not include that. But we are being told that we should, and we're seeking further clarification on that because, again, we're getting mixed messages.
And again, Phil, this is what Monica was talking about the flat rate. That's not, in fact, in the governor's May revise?
It is. And our calculation we have been given is the impact on us using the rates that we have with lots of elementaries and is $245 for a reduction, not $201.
Right, but that the county indicates we must include it in our budget, but it's not in the governor's May revised budget. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that's part of the anomalies that we're getting. Yeah. All the way through. The child development funds, our impact, we're estimating an impact of $9 million. We're also being told that we would risk losing federal dollars as well. We support 25 child development centers, which would basically have to close, or we would have to support them with general fund unrestricted, which would be a tremendous challenge for us, if not absolutely impossible.
And again, this is the pot of funds that the Department of Education is not even giving a calculation on.
Yeah. We tried. We talked to the Department of Finance, very high-ranking people, in a conference call, and they said they have put in numerous calls to the Department of Education and not had their calls returned. and they're not able to give us any direction on what to do, how to do. They will get back to us. They're hoping, not Monday because it's a holiday, but Tuesday of next week with more definitive information for us in the sense of the impact.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is we have received a circular from School Services of California, and their advice to districts in that sense, and they are, of course, advisory. They don't have the capacity to tell us what to do, but we follow their advice most of the time. Their advice is that we should include this cut in our budget for next year, which would, quite frankly, be a devastating cut for us if we do indeed do that. So we have school services telling us to include a cut. We have the county telling us to include a revenue reduction, and we're still seeking guidance and input from that, and have contacted everyone that we know in Sacramento, and it is a confusing picture to say the least.
So just to help me out here just a little bit, what you will be doing is basing our budget on a total of $201 less, $241 less than we receive right now.
$245 less.
$245 less. Okay. And what would that equal to?
Yeah, that's right. It's right up there, $4.8 million.
No, I mean per ADA per child. I'm sorry.
The actual number, 47.
If it's
$44 a kid.
per ADA, the total cut is $27 million.
Okay,
Okay.
I guess the question, yes. I guess the question is what is the amount? What is the ADA per child? Because that's what's asked of us quite frequently. What is the ADA per child we're talking about now?
In other words, current and then minus 245.
Yes, please.
It's don't have that. It's about $4,900, I believe.
I thought it was at $4,900 already.
Current. So we go down 245 from that. If that's correct.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't figure that out. You can continue on, Phil, but could you just give that number to me, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So then you say here, you says $4.8 million. If we do that, is that correct?
Yes, it's a 4.8 increased impact to us.
Okay.
If that cut is made.
Okay.
Yes, over what we're already facing.
Okay.
The Child Development Funds is $9 million, and then as you've heard, over 2 years, this year and next year, the impact of the special disabilities adjustment is $18 million. And again, we have sought clarification on that, and
but before you go on, the matching amount for federal dollars that we may lose, so it's $9 million from the state for child development funds. How much in federal dollars do we receive for the child development?
It's a matching amount.
So this is another $18 million?
It's at least that much. It's a 1-to-1, if not more.
So that's the question. Then would that be $18 million as well? Because if you're saying that if the state is going to cut an additional $9 million,
that's correct.
And matching it with
That's
federal,
correct.
so that
correct.
number shouldn't be 9; it should be 18.
If the federal government decides that the state, see, the anomaly here is the federal government may decide that the state itself is supplanting and not using funds the way it should, and then it would withdraw the money from the state, and then we would lose that portion accordingly. So they would be punishing the state, and the state would then, we would be punished because of that.
Okay. I had a couple of degrees in business, and one of the things about budgeting that I learned was that you ought to be very careful about budgeting and be conservative on your budget so that you had room for slippage that may occur.
Right.
And when you're saying you're asking for review of the recommendations, it seems to me like prudent budgeting would be to take the low end and use that as a baseline. If you don't, then your risk is extremely, you're basically putting everything at risk.
Yes, we
I'm not comfortable with that.
We are taking the conservative low numbers on enrollment, on the revenue limits. These three idiosyncrasies are so so damaging, and so it would be not conservative. It would be devastating for us to do that.
But isn't it prudent to plan for devastation?
Pardon?
Isn't it prudent to plan for devastation?
We will do that if that's the word that we get back early
planning
next week.
should have that information in it. It shouldn't be, you might say, okay, this is the best case scenario.
Right.
Oh, we get everything that we're asking reviews on. The worst case scenario is we don't get it. So now then, what's our budget based on? The best case scenario, the worst case scenario, or a combination thereof? I honestly think that we have basically been looking at the best case scenario all along. And basically when you do that and you sharpen your pencil at the same time, then any single thing becomes devastating.
Yes. Absolutely, and we will be planning for, as far as the numbers that we know right now, what we know, we are taking the conservative approach on revenue in every single area. When we come back to you, we're going to be asking for another workshop next week. I believe that's correct. And at that workshop, we may indeed see these numbers change drastically based on the best counsel and advice that we have.
I mean, I'm on the other side, not surprisingly, with Mr. DeBeck on this issue. I mean, we need to make decisions, real life decisions now on a document that the governor has submitted that in the end may or probably will not reflect anything close to what the final budget is. So we're already in a position that we have to do that. And then on top of that, to include further cuts that aren't even in his May revise on the one hand, or to include cuts that the State Department of Education is saying we're not agreeing to. We're not going to give an analysis because we don't believe these cuts are going anywhere. I don't think that's prudent. I think that's silly. And I don't think we should be in a position that we're simply, every time somebody in Sacramento comes up with a new idea, whether it's part of a budget or is being seriously analyzed, that we jump and put that cut in our budget. I can't support that.
So maybe I just need clarification because I'm not understanding. Maybe I'm just kind of trying to get my head around all this. The number you have here is $31.8 million, and I'm looking at maybe possible $40 million. And I got that $40 million because if you're saying that this revenue limit adjustment is something that the governor has recommended, is that correct?
I believe that's where it comes from.
I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding this.
I believe it.
Okay, This elimination of child care development funds is proposed to be eliminated, and the matching federal funds will probably go away as well. Then that's probably another $9 million. So I put 18 there versus 9. Okay, and then we're talking about the special disabilities adjustment funding change that they want to reach in our pockets and take. Mm-hmm. And this is something we would know in the next 5 weeks.
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to know some of this, but I don't think you're going to know it all in the next 5 weeks.
But the SDA, you won't.
But let me go back to the...
So what will we know in the short term? Okay,
well, that's a great question. I think today we simply are caught with a very uncertain environment. I mean, if the Senate Assembly action, as Bernie articulated earlier, were come to pass, maybe we'll quickly know something on one issue. But I think we will or may not know anything about the child development one just because CDE doesn't have anything to say specifically. And I'll go back to more on the child development. I just pulled out the sheet I had earlier. This is the federal fund stuff, Sheila.
Yes.
The May revision assumes that $785 million in federal funding for child care will be received for 2010-11. However, the Legislative Analyst's Office warns that between $100 and $200 million of this amount could be at risk if California does not increase state child care funding. So we don't know if it's exactly matching, but at risk, according to the LAO, is $100 to $200 million statewide in child care.
But this is also this elimination of child development funds, and I heard this in Sacramento as well. That was actually a huge rallying cry. So that's supposed to be $18 million?
Well...
Because if we lose federal matching funds,
exactly, and
so that's
I think somebody said that the matching would be about the same amount.
If if what we have been told is that there is a risk, as Bill said, for us to lose federal dollars. They have not told us it would be 1-for-1. They haven't told us that the feds would penalize the state the entire amount that they provide. But if the feds believe that the state of California is engaged in some form of supplanting, then there could be a penalty for that, and of course that would come down to us. But I think the bottom line is the answer to your question from our perspective is a resounding yes, that we will have to budget and present a balanced budget without full knowledge of all the facts. And that often happens where they don't approve the budget till September or October. There are some facts, but nothing like this that is so outstanding that it is very difficult to even perceive. So we are doing our best to contact everyone we know who has knowledge and could give us direction and guidance, and we will continue to do that next week and report back to you again next Thursday night, if it's Thursday night that we meet with you, on the latest information that we have at that point.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the approach, I think it's important that we point out, and this is along with what Richard was saying, that basically the budget that you have planned before this has been conservatively planned.
Correct.
It has been prudent.
Yes.
You have, for example, when you've looked at the enrollment projections,
yes,
you've done that very conservatively in
yes,
terms of when you're talking about worst
yes,
versus best case scenario.
Yes,
so that's what you're doing.
That is correct.
And my understanding, what we're being presented today is all of these additional potential cuts. And so it's not a matter of worst versus best, like the higher number, the lower number. We need to get further clarification from the state and from School Services Council and other people on what's the most prudent way to proceed forward without having absolute answers.
Correct.
So, okay.
Well, we're not the only. May I, Richard? Excuse me. We're not the only school district facing this.
Oh, no.
So, do we have a council of elders or something that is meeting to talk about this? A council of urbans,
I think most aggravated by all this are the large urbans like us.
Yeah.
LA Unified and Monica has been talking with her counterparts because you saw us get a double hit on the special ed and on the unified flat rate versus the adjusted.
But school services usually has these meetings, that I've attended regarding finance. So are they calling a special session of that, or are they, there's been... Okay.
They have been providing us regular updates, but they have not called a meeting.
So just very quickly, what I need what would help me is the budget that we submit on June 30th. Do we have to include these items in that particular budget? I mean,
right.
if our numbers have been conservative to this point, and these things are out there in the going on, do we have to include these in our final budget on June 30th?
I can tell you that right now the feedback we have from our county is that we must include revenue limit adjustment. The feedback we have from school services is that we should. There's a difference there.
But number one should be included.
That we should include the
child development.
The child development hit. And I believe what they're telling us, my best up reading of it is, and oh, by the way, there also may be a federal hit. It may be a percentage of it. We don't really know. We have no more information than what Bill just read to you.
But the county is our authority.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, and then you have, as Monica said, my understanding is that different counties are telling their districts different things. So that makes it, that exacerbates it a bit. I have contacted at least one district where I know the folks up in Northern California, and they get very different information. And they're a suburb of Sacramento, interestingly.
Right, Mr.
I get edgy about some of the, I'll call it the extensions of the information you've given us. And I'm on page 3 because I still have problems with it. Okay? The revenue limit adjustment was 201 or 245. Okay, so now it's downgraded to 201, right? So that's $44 per kid.
It was 201. It's being upgraded to 245.
The hit, but I'm saying, so the difference is in the amount. That is, the loss is $44 a kid.
Right.
All right, now then, that does not work out for this school district to $4.8 million. it works out to more than that, unless I'm a bad mathematician.
Let's get our calculators out. We can do it real quick.
Because we got somewhere in the range, that comes out to be at 108,000 kids, not 120,000 kids, which I'm closer to the real number with 120,000 than you are to 108. So how do you get that number?
Our ADA count is about 110,000.
Okay, then that's close. Okay,
Yes.
all right.
Yes.
But that's not the reported ADA, because the last reported ADA I saw was in the range of 118,000.
Right.
That's enrollment, John. Enrollment's 118.
Our enrollment
Okay. So
is 117,167. Our ADA,
So I got too many
that's based on the
numbers that are-
revenue, is 110,759.
So then I'll lock
You
in
have to take into
110,000
account the
as my
attendance
base number.
factor.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, just to give you very, very quickly here some historical data. I thought it might be interesting for you to take a look. Last year, this is last year to this year. Our revenue is down 12.8%. That's this year unrestricted, by the way. This is only the unrestricted portion of our budget. Expenditures are down 9.7%, so we're down, but we're not quite matching the loss in revenue. Because we're not matching the loss in revenue, you'll see that our balances are shrinking about 18.4%. We are saving money, but we're not quite keeping up, so therefore we are indeed deficit spending. If we look at a comparison of 9-10 to 10-11, this year to next year, we're anticipating, as for what we know right now, without these calamitous hits here, a total revenue increase of unrestricted by about just 1%. Our expenditures are planned with the draft budget we have right now to go up about 2.5%. Certificated salaries, about $357 million, are only going up by 0.14% of 1%. That's a little bit of, you have to take into consideration that we have transferred a lot of certificated positions into ERA, Title I, and SFSF. Classified, $96 million approximately, increase only about 1.2%. Health and welfare, it's about $80 million a year for us that we spend, and that is going up 11.2%. That's very significant. Our utility costs, about $22 million for next year. That's an increase of almost 5%. You wouldn't think telephone costs would be such a killer for us, but our telephone costs of about $6 million are going up.
You're going to have to. I can't speak for other board members, but I really need to see something. I mean, I went to an E-rate seminar, and I know we're getting E-rate, and I know we're getting all of these discounts, and you can't tell me we're getting all these discounts and then turn around and everything is going up. That makes no sense. And I also won't follow up. I asked that for our utility bills, you can't tell me that we haven't spoken with someone. We, SDG&E's largest customer, I think that they could give us a break in this particular situation. In addition to that, I asked that we work with our schools to get each school site to reduce their utilities by 10%. And I have seen none of that come up toward the board as how we're going to do it. Have we even thought about it? Or is Ms. Jackson just talking in the wind?
No,
Okay.
no, one reason I highlighted these 4 lines for you is because these are the 4 lines that to me, looking at the unrestricted funding, are out of balance with the rest. And so we are engaged. We are engaged in discussions with the appropriate people for each one of these to understand why they are going up, what we can do about it, and
I have one comment, though.
and go from there.
If we're so concerned about telephone costs, I was told that the telephone costs, we've got a telephone in every teacher's classroom, and I was told just so de minimis. It was like $2 per telephone. So, it'd be nice if we had some numbers in addition to these percentages. What are we talking about? With regard to what is the telephone cost? What is the actual cost? What are the actuals on these numbers instead of just a general percentage?
This represents a lot of our data.
Most of this is data lines. It's not phone increases, but we are getting discounts.
Okay.
But the finance office recognizes those discounts as revenue. So what you're seeing is an increase in the bill, but the discounts are coming in as revenue. So they're not showing the amounts.
The net.
Thank you. They're not showing that. So you're going to see that increase on this side, but we're also getting the equivalent discount on the other side. So you've got
Well, we should know that.
And we're going.
I know.
That's
I just
exactly.
went to a briefing the other day, and we are getting. I mean, I was impressed with the amount of money that we're getting as far as discounts. So that is why these numbers are. So I think what would be helpful for the board members is that we get something that shows the net.
Okay.
So that so even though it's in different pockets.
And that's exactly what we're doing, and,
Well, actually, I'd like-
we will try and get that for you by next week.
I'd like to know what the actual is and what we're saving, and then what the net is.
Right.
But if it
That's-
shows as a net, then the income will not show as an increase. You can't show it in two places.
You can explain it.
That's simple
You can explain
accounting.
it.
You either
You can
do
make
it
a
one
chart.
place or the other. So,
You can make
you
a
can't
chart.
take credit for it as income. It really isn't. It's a discount on your bill, which means a lower cost for the service. But you're right. They're not doing it right because they're showing it as income on one hand. Oh, look, we're not as poor as we think, but yet the bills are going up. So the board's looking at it and saying, attack. We're going to attack telephone costs, but they're not really telephone costs that are honestly reported. They're just the way we keep our books.
And it stems from a practice that the E-rate program early on told schools, don't build these discounts into your budgets. Build them separately. But the E-rate program has been in place for 13 years now, and school districts are truly dependent on these discounts. They could not do without them.
So then on the page 5, then shouldn't the revenue, because revenue for 2010 only went up by 1%.
That's correct. The
Revenue went up by 10%. Well, but went up by 1%. But you're saying that the telephone cost is okay.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and that's absolutely true because we book those as unrestricted revenue, so they are reflected in the 1%. Now, what we're doing for you, and I'm trying to be transparent here with you on some areas where we think there are issues as well. So we're in agreement with
Phil,
you.
we're going to take your part anyway, even if you're trying to be.
Oh, I understand that. No, I understand. You're welcome to do
Not
so.
you. It's just frustrating.
Yeah.
But look now. There are certain anomalies in each one of these. We can say the books and supplies really isn't going up 37% because we reduced it so much this year in all of our freezes and all of our cuts. Next year in the budget, those reductions are not reflected. So it is a comparison of a year with the reductions and a comparison without, but it still is a significant increase. And I feel it's our responsibility to look at it and dig deeper into it and find out what it is and then report back to you what it is. And I guess in my mind, this is the first step in that sense. The contracts, I was hoping, we have reduced our contracts significantly. However, the vast majority of them have been on the restricted side. So now when we pulled the data for the unrestricted, which is fascinating to me, it's only down 2%. That's not satisfactory in my mind. That's not enough because reducing and it's consultants and contracts, all right? Now you probably never thought you'd hear a former ex-consultant stand up and say this, but reducing at 2% on the unrestricted side for consultants and contracts isn't adequate. It's not enough. So we've got to keep digging. And we have a list now this thick of all of the unrestricted contracts. We haven't provided it to you because we're going through it yet. But we have that. We're going through it. But if I showed you the restricted contracts have gone down, you would see a much greater, and that's due to the good work of Drew and his folks.
I don't understand because I thought last year we got a list of all the contracts and we said that before any of those, they all should have ended June 30th of last year. The ones that ended June 30th were supposed to be expiring unless it was brought to the board specifically. And every 6 months or so, the board is asking. I just ask again for all those contracts. So it shouldn't be a separate list. If you're telling me that you gave us a list of just unrestricted contracts and there's a whole nother list of restricted contracts, then that is totally inappropriate.
I'm telling you that what I'm telling you is that our restricted contracts have gone down significantly. I haven't shown you any restricted revenue here because our deficit problem is on the unrestricted side. I was hoping that we would see, because of the work some of the work we've done, our unrestricted contracted services reduced more significantly. They have not been. So we have not done a good job in that. So we have Mr. Hamby pulling all of them, pulling all of the expiration dates, pulling what kind of contracts, what they're for. I think we're down a lot in the consulting contracts, but apparently our contracts have not gone down. Now we book some of our agreements for our software, that kind of work. Those are in contracts too, and they're very large, and we can't reduce them.
I understand that, Phil. I guess my question,
Yeah.
I don't want my point is that last year, at least twice, the board has received a copy of all the contracts that we're engaged in. In the initial run that came out before June and I asked because I said we need, in order for us to save money in the big picture, we need to curtail some of these contracts that are outside the district. I think we got an update again in January. I asked again so I could compare to see whether or not we're decreasing in the amount of contracts. So in my mind, we're due for another list about now. And when we compare that list, then that list, what you're saying is that when I look at the list that I got last June 30th, as compared to the one, I guess May 25th or whenever it came out last time, when I compared it to the one that you give me this year, it should be a lot less, because last year when we was reducing the budget, we said do not enter into any more of the goal was to stop entering to these contracts. And so now if you're telling me that I'm going to get a list, because that's why I keep my offices mess, because I keep all that stuff. So when I go back and compare it, I don't expect to see what I think I'm hearing you saying, which is that it's going to be more contracts than we had last year.
And I agree with everything you're saying, and that's why we're looking at it, and that's why you will get a list back from us, and we will do a good analysis of it. But it does include a lot of different types of agreements that the district has, and we'll tell you that.
All of them.
We will sort through that. Yes, sir.
I was just going to add that our Hanby has been regularly giving you those contract reports. I think you've seen page after page. What I think, and we'll certainly update that, what I think we're saying is that we have cut incredibly the contracts, but it was never done with a specific focus on color of money as much as driving contracts down where it made sense to go down. So we need to make sure we identify both that, but we'll get that updated contract report to you.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we've never looked at it before by the color of money, supporting the contracts, and we're going to do that.
The Senate Budget Committee just agreed with the Assembly, so and thanks to a lot of hard work by Monica and the other districts, we flooded them with phone calls. They voted unanimously to take the gun from our head.
Not sunset.
To not sunset it, but there's some language. It's still going to go to conference committee. It's not done. So the gun is still in their hand, but it's away from our head.
Yeah, but if it's agree and it goes to conference.
But I just want to thank Monica for bringing this to our attention. We put a lot of people in action this afternoon. I know our board president made a phone call. Randy Ward made a phone call. They got flooded by calls, and Senator Duchenne stood up for us, and it was a unanimous vote. So, but we still have work to do. Like I said, the gun's away from our head. We've succeeded today, but we still have work to do.
Good work, Monica.
Very good.
Okay,
Mr. Stover.
I want everyone to remember Monica saved us $18 million.
That's right.
That's just the latest.
She gets a tip. Okay. Just in terms of the way that the information is presented, I know it's all very complicated and you're trying to do it in a simple way, but for example, what happened with the telephone costs, which are actually data lines, there's an increase, but then on the other side there's these discounts that are revenue, so it's not that clear. But particularly on the back on page 5, I think for the average person in the public or for a board member of average intelligence, I can understand the fact that our health and welfare has continued every year to go up tremendously. But when we are talking about tremendous cuts from the state and we're cutting all kinds of things out of our budget, when we see that next year that we have 1% more revenues and we're spending 2.5% more when we're cutting, that doesn't make sense to me.
That's why I'm showing it to you. I mean, what I'm showing, and I don't want you to think I'm just showing it to you and not doing anything about it. I mean, we did this analysis to say what we're trying to do is not just count the numbers. We're trying to read the numbers, and I make that distinction as a layperson. They'll get mad at me if I say it's easy to count the numbers. I mean, that's a matter of spreadsheet thing. But we have to look at the numbers and analyze them and read them and see what they're telling us. And when I see these numbers, I take in a certain way. I don't take a risk in showing them to you, but I'm trying to be honest and say I only pick those numbers to put on here that seem to me to be problematic.
But when
we're trying to solve them and deal with them and find out why and what we can do to reduce them.
But can you explain to me? I mean, the revenue increased by 1% and expenditure increased by 2.5%. I don't understand what that means when we're cutting things by 10%. Mm-hmm. And the money we're getting is going down by 10%.
We're not cutting everything the same amount.
Well, our total revenue, unrestricted revenue, with all of the revenue in it, is increasing by 1%.
Okay, that's because it's in the other area, that restricted, where we're losing the money. Is that the case? Is that why there's increase in unrestricted and decrease in restricted? Is that why this comes out a positive?
No, I don't think so.
Well,
I mean, somebody else.
Putting it simply,
speak to that. What we're saying.
If I could, your revenues could increase, and because of step and column and other reasons for promotion, your expenditures can increase faster.
We are deficit spending because
and
called inflation.
And then the question is, if we're cutting, we're selectively cutting. We're not cutting across the board at a certain rate, so you can't expect the rate to be the same. In other words, if you were cutting expenditures proportionally, that would be different, but you're not. So what you're doing is you're picking out parts of, and you might cut 100% on one thing, which would only be a 0.1% for the entire school district, or even lower.
To make up for some of the increases.
Sure. So then you end up with, certainly you can't compare the differences until you actually get down to the line items.
And proportionally, your salaries and benefits are such a large part of your budget.
Sure.
So when you do a step and column, it's going to outpace the revenue piece.
I understand that on the expenditure side.
Okay. But I think we understand that in the ones below that where it says salaries, we understand that there. But when it comes to expenditures...
Well, actually, just especially the very first line, revenues. Revenues going up by 1%.
That's true.
When we're losing $150 million.
And that is actual for this year, with a little bit of projection in it.
Right.
And what we're budgeting for next year.
Okay.
So we're budgeting.
But how is it? I mean, we'd have to. How is it possible? How are unrestricted revenues going up by 1%? I don't understand that.
Our actual receipts from this year and our budgeted receipts from next year, we're increasing by 1%.
So we're budgeting way too much. If we're taking a 10% cut.
Well.
I'm looking at even the beginning balance is down 18%.
Mm-hmm.
So
because we are deficit spending, because our spending will increase by 2.5% over what the revenues will increase.
Phil, could I ask you to, at some point, get us a breakdown in how revenues are increasing by 1%?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
'Cause everything that we talk about is we're losing revenue. We're getting a $245 or $201, cut per ADA. Mm-hmm. Where is the revenue increasing? What's the source of that?
I was just trying to clarify for Phil. I think part of the confusion is that these percentages are comparing our current actuals or projection versus our starting balance or budget next year. So if anything, as we're trying to grow our ending balance this year, we're rolling that into next year into our budget. So it's kind of distorting those numbers when you're trying to cut costs and budget to save money to make your beginning balance grow to next year, because that growth is making your budget look larger next year. So I think that's part of
calling that revenue. If our
Why wouldn't we have revenue as one line and savings or increases in the ending balance as another line? But you can't count this year's savings as revenues. It's only an accounting gimmick. You're just adding it into next year, but it will show up in the ending balance. But the truth is, the ending balance is composed of a lot of things. But next year's budget is also composed about the gains in the ending balance and the changes in income. So if we show ADA income, I think Richard is right. The ADA income will show a reduction. The problem is that the revenues that you're counting, what you call revenues, are not ADA revenues, but a whole lot of things, including an improvement in the ending balance caused by this year's savings. That's inaccurate.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, the ending balance.
From the point of view of what Richard said, it's absolutely inaccurate. It's just
trying to look at how much the state is giving us.
I mean, everything you just said is absolutely correct.
We don't try to make mistakes.
Yeah. So it is not just ADA. It certainly is not just ADA. It's what Darrell was telling you about
discounts from the E-rate.
Yeah, all that kind of funding as well. And again, I would tell you that these are things that we want to look at, we want to explore, we want to figure out, get good answers for. Yeah. But the ending balance is in, or the beginning balance for the next year is in there.
Forgive me, I kind of think that. Well, let's go on.
Okay. All right. All right. We have a few more. We can just move on. If you have one more slide there on special ed. And then what we're looking at here tonight is the focus really is on our projected deficit. And ultimately, we will need the board to take action on some things to help us solve that, and we'll go through those as we get to that. Then the next slide is just a brief timeline. If we can put up the projected deficit up on the screen. There we go.
I guess for me it's going to be difficult. I see that you said solutions needing board action. It's hard for me to think about solutions when you guys can't even explain to me why you have the numbers that you're trying to figure out. If you don't have the information and you can't figure out the numbers that we need, but you're going to turn around and ask us to approve something, it's like you're asking us to approve something in advance. And for me, that doesn't work, because what it is that it's like we don't know what we're doing over here. We're not quite sure over here. But if you go ahead and approve these items, we'll make sure it all matches up in the end. And I think that's the problem that we've been doing for too long, matching it up in the end. I think at some point in time over here where we don't quite know what everything is, wherever it is, how it is, or whatever, we need to straighten this out so that when we bring solutions, the solutions match up right then to whatever it is that we're trying to work out.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, let's imagine a huge checking account with $2.1 billion in it, and people writing checks, and people spending money, and they have to reconcile it daily. You can't. The reason why you have a process for reconciling your checking account is you have to go back and bring things up to date. This is such a massive operation that bringing things up to date can't be done instantaneously. Okay, so you have to do projections, you have to have estimates, you have to run around imprecise dollars. I don't disagree with that concept. You'll find that everywhere. But part of our budgeting has to be as accurate as possible or allow for. And that's the difference, and that may be the difference between Richard and I in terms of philosophy, is we have to allow for the potential dangers of miscalculation. There are people who write checks that don't know their current balance on their checking account.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They are taking a risk. Mm-hmm. The school district is doing the same thing, and you need to be as accurate as you can on that. And so if you have a budget personally, you know that you're going to have a certain amount of income coming in from your paychecks or whatever, and then you're going to have certain ongoing expenses like your mortgage and your utilities and all that. When you get a surprise, Some folks run to their credit card or hopefully to their savings. But that's exactly the same thing, but on a huge scale that we're trying to do here. We don't have a current cash balance that's accurate, I don't think. We're doing the same thing you do with your checking account. I hope you reconcile it, because if you're not, you're going to end up with some surprises someday. That's the same thing we're facing right now when we're talking about having to know the data.
Right.
I think
we
I
do.
understand
We do
that.
Go ahead.
I understand we have to reconcile, but I guess in my mind I would look at it for the 10-11 budget. And this goes back to the revenues. For the 10-11 budget, to make it simple for people, very simple for me, we know we're going to get X amount of dollars. And let's just use one school. We tell that school that we know we got 200 schools. And if we know we're going to get, $1,000 and we go down and give each school, we know there's going to be $200 gone out of that. Okay, we may give more, but just on the simple level, we know that. And I guess that's what we don't see. So when we get to the end of that, allocating the money per school, and then we look at things that we got to allocate money for PPO and legal and that type of thing. And what happens, I guess, which confuses maybe this particular board member, is it's not just listed that clearly. Okay, it's not saying that we have this $1.2 billion budget and the school's budget is $10 million or $7 million or $8 million, and when we get down to the bottom, PPO's budget is this, interpretation budget is this, and therefore the end is this. But so therefore we have the reserve in case something happens. It doesn't come to us that clearly. So when you say reconciliation, because then what I do know from past experience, I know we're not doing it now, is that you may give a school a budget for $10 million, but then the school can call up the stairs and they can cry and whine and say, I need a little bit more. So you give them a little bit more. And it comes to us, whether it's $10,000 or $20,000, and then one school does it, then another school does it, then another school does it, and all of a sudden we're out of whack. And I guess the point that I'm trying to get to, to say right now, is that for me in doing our budget for make it easy is to say, this is how much we're allocated per item, almost line item, but per school, this is the allocation, and then we know. So when we're looking at who went over the budget, we can say, we see here where the board office went over the budget. Okay?
We went over the budget by allocating more people than we had jobs for.
Okay. So then if we come to the end and we know that, then certainly that's what we're doing now. We're going back, making that adjustment. That's what it sounds like we're trying to do now.
We reconcile every week to our revenue, and probably not as often our expenses, but we will be doing that certainly more quickly. I will tell you that over the past week and a half or so, or 2 weeks, our challenge has been the external factors driving changes in our numbers. Our internal numbers have been extremely stable during the nitty-gritty crunch time of this budget process. So I feel very good about that we have not had the swings and the changes in the internal accounting of the numbers. Now, we can break those down for you. We have the capacity to break down the numbers for you any way that you would like. That's why this is informational, and part of it is for you to inform us, not just for us to inform you, but for you to inform us what you would like. And we can get that for you in the sense of how you would like cost, expenditures, revenue broken down. If you would like to see a breakdown of all of our unrestricted revenue by category, you'll have it next week. Let us know, and we will provide it to you.
All right, Ms. Nakamura.
I think the numbers are really important, but I think that what we are facing is very similar to what's happening in the Gulf right now. We've got oil pouring out. We are, a huge district, and it's coming out by the gallons. And I think it's unfortunate that you had these two little numbers here that just set everyone off. Obviously, these numbers are changing all the time. We just had, we just saved $18 million because of what happened up in Sacramento.
Sure.
And the public struggles to understand that, but I don't think we should, and I don't think we should get as caught up in that. I agree with a conservative approach to our numbers. I don't want to get carried away by what's going on up in Sacramento. Up in the county is our authorizing agency. We have to pay attention to what they're recommending. School Services is not. So the $4.8 million revenue limit adjustment we're going to have to make. And I think that we should pay attention instead of worrying too terribly much about what's going on up in Sacramento, but I think we have to keep an eye on it. But I'm dismayed that the board is getting this caught up in these numbers that we're still attacking these this way. I really am not interested in having staff go out and do a line item on every single item and reorganize all the chairs on the deck of the Titanic here. We really need to get down to the numbers and figure out what the answers are and make a decision about what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, and why. But this is a huge operation, far beyond most people's ability to understand. I would like to have had better numbers as far as having actuals regarding to utility costs, because it just creates more consternation and confusion in people's minds. But we've got to make decisions, and I think we have to be very careful in what we're asking staff to do and how they're going to do it.
Let me clarify. I didn't ask staff to do anything except for if they're going to ask us, and I was just looking at the page where it says solutions needing board action. And if you're going to ask me to do an action, I like to know why I'm doing that particular action.
I agree.
So it's not that I'm just doing something in the blind. I don't know how many people write blank checks and just hand them off to someone, but that's what I felt like these items here are asking us to do. That's my interpretation of it, and it's not that I don't fully understand this. I do, but we have people, our constituents that don't fully understand it, and I'm trying to ask the questions down to the level that some of them might be looking at, wanting to understand. And that is what our responsibility is too, is so that they're going to ask us to explain this to them at their level, not at our level or above us, but at their level,
certainly,
wherever they are.
Certainly.
Mr. Coben, I just, and again, at some point we'll make a decision, I suppose, as a board about this. I just want to, again, challenge the idea that we have to include the $4.8 million in cuts in our budget. In order to do that, somebody's going to have to explain to me why the rules just changed. The rules that we've been operating under, as I've understood them, for the last 2 years, is if it's in the May revise, you have to deal with that. You've got to put it in your budget, despite the fact that we know the final budget is not going to reflect what's in the May revise. Now, this county apparently is telling districts what other counties are not, which is include a cut that is somebody's idea somewhere around this idea that we're certainly going to oppose through advocacy, that we move to flat rate cuts rather than percentage cuts. Monica just walked us through why that's a problem for districts like ours. So we are going to advocate that the state does not make the cuts in that way. But it's not in the May revise that the cuts are made in that way. So I don't know where this idea is coming from. I don't know what traction it has, but I especially want to know before I just, can agree to putting these cuts into our budget just because this county tells us to. I've got to know, why did the rules just change? Why is this county interpreting, that is going to happen, that this flat rate cut versus percentage rate cut is going to happen when it's not in the May revise, and when other counties, I need to have some...
That's an argument I can get behind, but rearranging the day-to-day numbers and, the utilities, I can't... I mean, we're going to have a meltdown among the staff, and I think this is keep our eye on this prize.
Okay, sorry.
You're right.
Mr. Coben.
Yeah, let me provide a little context here. We are balancing a $1.2 billion budget in the general fund, plus all of our property and other accounts. So that's happening right now. What we're going to fund the board office versus school A is happening. What you have here is what isn't balanced, okay? So when you get to an adopted budget, first read, second read, that's when that god-awful 200-page SACS report comes out. Line by line, the accounting piece all gets built. So when you have a $1.2 billion budget, and you've spent a lot of time as a board with staff trying to figure out, when we began the year, saying there's going to be this $79 or $80 million deficit. So much of the conversation now is we have balanced the vast majority of the budget for where we were going to go based on decisions. What we're trying to do here is to make sure that we have covered the deficit that we recognize was coming at us next year and the puts and takes. We did walk through this the other day a little bit. We wanted to update you on it. Now, independent of trying to get that last piece of the budget balanced is all of this huge distraction that's just happened in the last couple of days. This special ed piece. I agree with you, Richard. I don't know why, if it's not in the May revise, we would want to factor that in, other than we have to have a detailed conversation with the county office. So we've got the deficit that we've all been working on very hard all year, while we balance the vast majority of the budget and then deal with the distraction that's just emerged in the last 3 days. So that's kind of where we are. So this piece here is just about getting to that last part of the budget balanced.
Do we have information about what counties are saying what? I mean, if we're different from all the other counties, is there
I guess we could ask Monica or somebody.
Monica, is there a clear divide on the advice that, the advice our county is giving in one instance, and then the advice other counties? I mean, are there two versions of this, or are counties all over the map, in this regard?
I think the problem is that right now there's no budget bill language that's very specific. And again, this is where we get into some of the problems where the state is saying, I want a cut of a certain amount. And how exactly that's going to be calculated is extremely important at the local level, because if the budget bill is written one way, that it means one thing, and if it's written another way, it means a different number. I think what happened with school services assumed that it would happen in a certain way. This is separate actually from the flat versus percentage cut. There's something even prior to that happens, which is, let's assume you do it on the percentage. Well, actually, first there's the question of, is it going to be flat or is it going to be a percentage? If it's a flat number versus a percentage rate, we already start bifurcating. There's two roads to go down. Now, assuming it's a percentage cut, then the question becomes, do you take the percentage off of, this is very technical speak that the budget office knows better, but do you take it off of the undeficited revenue limit number or not? And that's then another fork in the road that needs to be taken. So there are a lot of different conclusions that could be reached, and people are taking, sort of working off of these different forks in the road in different ways. Some of them are going down one fork in the road, some of them are going down another, and I think this speaks to sort of the general question that was posed: how do you want to deal with this is very difficult until we get much or more precise numbers. I think I'm definitely coming away with the charge, when I'm back in Sacramento, one of the first things I want to make sure they know is they can't continue to let this indecision, continue to make it difficult for boards to reach good decisions, because they're thinking, oh, this is something we can resolve after May revision, maybe we can resolve it in conference committee, or maybe not until the final budget is passed. But unless they start giving us some strong indicators, there's going to be too many different options for how to interpret the cuts and what it means locally.
Great.
In some sense, we will have to use our best wisdom, possibly, to make those decisions, and your direction in making those decisions in the absence of greater clarification. Because unfortunately, we do have a constitutional deadline that we have to honor, even if no one else does at a higher level. All right, let's move through the projected deficit. These numbers. The numbers that you were looking at way back over the winter, and in the fall and the winter was a projected deficit of $79.2 million. You see at the top, the board approved, and we have been able to implement approximately $50.5 million of those. We still have approximately $28.7 million of the problem that we identified for you, and you made decisions back in February. Adding to that, we've got, you'll see here the next lines 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 add to the deficit problem that we have, bringing it up to a total of approximately $55 million. The special ed, you can pretty much see what is counted in the special ed challenge for us. A class size reduction, $8 million, where the claim came in lower. PPO, the PPO is a deficit. Perhaps this is the one that I would say we choose to have as a deficit, because you'll see a report next week that will highlight that for you. We believe that we must fund at least a minimum of $6 million in order to keep PPO afloat. Our ending balance adjustment, as you see, it came in at $17.9 million without reserves, compared to the $20.1 million that we had projected. And then the benchmark assessment is also, we have added that into the budget for this year, and I have the document that you requested the other day showing the puts and the takes. We can look at that in a little bit if you would like to. But the net result of all that is about $55 million. Now, we believe that we have worked with our academic and our HR counterparts to come up with some solutions for you. The first being the $16.2 million in certificated deficits. We have a document to show you one potential solution for solving that. We can go over in a few minutes. Elimination of vacant positions. We will have, by this time next week when we get back together, you will have, actually you'll have it before that, a detailed list of all of the vacancies that comprise this $6 million. We have been scrubbing it to make sure that critical positions are not included, to make sure that where positions are vacant because someone is on leave for being ill or light duty or those kind of things, that we're absolutely getting it perfect for you. The special ed, you can see the $4.8 million there. And we go right on down here. We have to. We believe we need to continue the freezes and the vacancy reductions that we began this year, and so you'll see some of that in the central office cuts. The Title I, you'll see lines 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 involving the use of Title I funds. We have done exhaustive research on that. We've, again, been on numbers of conference calls. We have run what we would like to do, the plan for what we would like to do by School Services of California. We've run it by our auditors, Nigro, and White. We've run it by a partner in Brunstein and Manisevic, which is the legal firm in Washington, D.C. that's written all the books on Title I. We've talked to the California Department of Education, and I don't want to represent that they are saying it's okay, because they're getting back to us again in that sense. We do know what we would need to do in the way of making that happen, in the sense of a methodology, where we would have to do consultation with our DAC. We would have to do that in June. We'd have to look for you for approval. We do have all the data related to what the cost would be, our current balances, how we can make that happen, and we still believe, based on all of that, all the input that we have had, that those are viable options. They would require some board action to do that, and they may, and this is still a may because we haven't done a final review of it, involve the district, the board, changing our LEA plan accordingly for next year. But we believe there is sufficient revenue both in our balances and in our in what we will receive next year to make that happen. The line 20 Line 19 is just a transfer of some money. Line 20, in the past few days, we've been refining our numbers on the summer school, and we reached a consensus with our academic partners and the summer school folks, the deputy superintendent, and finance that there is $1 million there that we can use, and then the self-insurance funds, those transfers.
We're looking for Ms. Meyer. And some assurance on, on summer school, I guess.
We were just looking at it, that's all.
That was a particular point of interest for...
Okay, well, she can come up in a second. She's been certainly working on this with us. And then finally, the self-insurance funds are funds where we have had our folks come in who do all of our analysis, all our actuarial work, and they are telling us that we can maintain viability in the funds and reduce these dollar amounts from there. The adult ed, basically line 24, is going to transfer. It's not a reduction of revenue there. If you approved all of those items, we would be about $720,000 to the good in the sense of a balanced budget for next year. Now, I'm sure that I can either take questions on those or I can show you the anomaly sheet.
Okay. I'd like to... May I?
Yes, please.
All right. I'd like to go to lines 13 through 18. And I immediately looked at what I thought might be at risk. And my first reaction is the retroactive charging of counselors off $5 million out of this year. We had a Title I agreement last year. Okay, and then last year I thought we had a budget for this year that had a Title I stuff in it. And now, all of a sudden, we're now doctoring that Title I budget by saying, okay, no, we're going to add to this some money to charge off people we'd have paid out of general fund anyway. And I really think that's a risk. Okay, I'm not going to get into how you defend yourself, whether you defend yourself or if you can. But there's a risk of $5 million there. There's a risk of the counselors, the funding of counselors for Title I for 10-11 would be subject to, I assume, the advisory committee, and that hasn't been approved. So you're basically saying it doesn't matter. We're going to do it anyway. Okay. So we've been there. I've been in this business long enough to know you're making presumptions when you say that Title I people all agree to this. Okay. Now we're going down to the other duplication, funding of grad coaches with Title I. All grad coaches? No, some. Or is it every school, including non-Title I schools? Let me put it this way. I think that's risky. It's risky to do it out of this year's budget because it was agreed on last year, and there's no DAC approval, even mechanism for them to change that budget. So unless you're going to go back and say, please forgive us, that's, I think, the only answer. Because I believe there was a sign-off on the Title I budget for this existing year already. So then we're changing it unilaterally. I don't think that's a good risk. I'm not going to get into why, I understand what it's there, but I don't think that it's a very good risk. And I don't care who you talk with up there. We've had some agreements in the past with the feds that they rescinded. So I don't, they said, yeah, you can do it. And then we ended up with the $9 million we owed for whatever it was. I can find it, but I'm not going to do it. So what I'm saying is, as soon as you start presuming things around agreements that you're supposed to have with other people, I don't think you can actually bank those. So if I look at this whole Title I package, you're talking about maybe $8 million?
16.
Well, but I'm assuming you might be able to get away with it the coming year, but that still means you're going to have a little coercion going on maybe. But the point of it is, I don't think that's a good idea as a strategy for a budget, or I don't think it's a conservative view at all. It may be a pragmatic approach. We're going to balance the budget, whatever, but I don't think it's going to fly. So the risk is we got an ending balance that's $9 or $10 million lower, which I think we'll probably get it to our reserves sooner or later. We can't deficit spend forever and not end up with the reserves in jeopardy. And so that's where I'm coming from. And I'm not sure about some of these other things, but I definitely feel strongly about the Title I issue. And, I think it's basically presumptuous to say we're going to solve our budget crisis on the backs of Title I.
Oh, go ahead.
If I can comment real quick, you're absolutely correct. We value so much our relationship with the DAC and the time and effort they put into talking with us and consulting on the budget. So we would definitely want to engage with them immediately and get input from them. Since this has been published and the advice that we've gotten today, on the counselors, we had made a revision that would be 10-11. We would not backdate that activity. But all these other activities, we would definitely need to consult with the DAC and get their input.
So the $5 million for 10 and 9-10 is off the table.
Line 13?
It would be added to the cost shift for next year. It would be for next year.
So basically going to double hit them next year for this year's expense.
And there has been a lot of question and concern about the large balance of this year. We were looking today, and it's come up in the board meetings in March and April. We start out with a balancing question of $19 million, and today there was about $14.5 million still in Title I that it was on the books.
Is there any precedent for Title I accepting expenditures from one year to carry over to the next as a legitimate charge against the following year, ever, anywhere?
I'm sorry, I must have misspoke.
Well, you're telling me, unless I'm misunderstanding you, which is not impossible, you're telling me that the counselor's funding, that $5 million, line 13, is going to be charged against next year.
No, we would actually charge, of the counselor costs for 10-11, we would charge $10 million of those costs. So we wouldn't move. We would leave all the counselor expenses as they are for 9-10.
Oh, you're going to catch up?
Yes.
Okay. First question is on line 9. Line 9 says that we have to eliminate 234 positions. Okay, and then when we get to line 10, it's eliminate vacant positions.
These are classified. The line 10 is classified positions.
Line 10 is classified position.
Line 9 would be certificated.
Okay. All right. And
if I may too, I want to clarify, because I think it's a very important point that we are not asking you to approve these reductions. I think that's very important, and maybe that's we're asking you to. We are asking for you. We are presenting these to you as proposed reductions. If there are, if the board's direction was to eliminate the Title I as an option, we'll do our homework. We'll tell you that we've gotten that input. We have gotten the DAC. The DAC has agreed to waive its 60-day requirement for us to be able to meet with them June 16th to review this with them. If, in spite of that, the board would collectively decide that these are not the reductions you would want, then we would have to go back and identify somehow. We'd have to find others. So we're not we're not coming to you saying these are your choices, board, and we're asking you to just approve them. We're presenting them to you as our best way that we know to solve right now.
Okay, just one quick piece. Okay, so it seems to me prudent that staff tells us we have some choices, but we don't have any choices on this list. We either take them or invent our own. See, that's not the way I expect staff to come to me. Either they're recommending these cuts, or they're recommending these cuts and a collection of other cuts where I can make some choices from. Because that's why we pay staff, is to have ideas.
Absolutely.
Okay? And
Absolutely.
I don't want to sit up here and invent a solution to the budget. I got my own ideas, and I'll be very glad they've been rejected pretty steadily. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter. If I got a list like this, it only incites me to think of new ideas. Mm-hmm. Okay? Well, that's what I get the big bucks for? Or is that what I get staff to come up with? Okay? And I'm saying if you give me a choice, and if let's say we pick away one of these, we're still not going to have a $120,000 surplus. If we take away one of these, we're going to have a deficit.
Correct.
So then I have no choice, unless I'm going to be inventive enough to create my own selection of a list based on my own background, which is putting it all back on me and the rest of this board. I say me because I can only speak for myself.
Sure.
But the point of it is, I'm disappointed when a staff brings me a set of recommendations that add up to an even amount, close to an even amount of the cuts I need, and then says it's not our recommendation.
No, I didn't say it's not our recommendation.
Well, then say
it. These are our recommended cuts. I'm saying that we are not, in a blanket sense, asking you to approve these, because we know that you don't always accept. You may not accept our recommendation, and if you don't, then it's our responsibility to come back and provide you others.
I think that the comment that I will, Mr. DeBeck, I agree on is that you say that if we don't accept these, you go back and find others, and I think that the others should have came with these. So I think that's so. But let me go back to my other questions that I had written down. And certainly we spoke yesterday. I don't see David here. I don't see Dr. Campbell here, and I don't see people from special ed here. And I think what I mentioned to you yesterday, and Mr. Koba, I'll say this: is it's not enough for this board member. I don't speak for the rest of the board. I'm very well aware of that. It's not enough for the people, the number counters upstairs to come down and say, this is what we need to do. Mm-hmm. And I said yesterday, these conversations need to occur before they get to the board. Mm-hmm. Okay? When you met yesterday, just very briefly, you and Dr. Campbell, they hadn't even talked to her about this. Okay? No. But my point is that conversation should have taken place. The DAC conversation should have taken place before you bring it to the board. Because what happens, whether it's intended or not intended, is the board kind of says, well, okay, these look good to me. So then people go out and say, well, the board said it was kind of okay. They're going to approve it at the next board meeting. And that's not totally true. But by not having the people here to stand up, because I would like to ask them questions as to what is the impact of some of these. So certainly the certificated positions, according to this, and so I think Sandra's here and she can probably speak to this one, if you say we're required to eliminate, that means take off the books 234 positions, how many people does that require us to, I think I hear you saying eliminate positions, but what about the people? So you're saying we eliminate the positions on paper, but we keep the people? Is that what it is? Or how many FTEs is this? How many FTEs does this equal out to?
It's 234 FTE funded positions.
Okay. So then now that you said that, the first thing that triggers in my mind is that, okay, we've issued the notices for 112, and then is the remainder of that, the other 120 some odd people, is that going to happen through attrition or through some other means to meet that number of 243? Okay. All right.
Well, we got Bill and then Catherine, but and the 234 continues to be a little bit of a. I'm not sure if we should put it in this box, because we need to eliminate $16.2 million, and when we talk about doing that potentially by the reduction of some positions that are funded by Tier 3 categorical. That might not, in fact, be 234. It might be fewer. So, yeah. So, I'm sorry, Bill and then Catherine. Yeah.
Let me clarify some of this. This is broken down. This is that balancing of the $79 million. The deficits are that end of the year catch up and validation, and I think John actually talked about that. So you have $55 million in updating of various pieces. And I do think what is below there is the staff's best recommendation at this point for how to plug that hole. And let me note, first and foremost, the board has already directed us to find $16.2 million, and Richard's right, is the number of positions, but this is one of our critical tasks. the elimination of the vacant positions. This is the accounting requirement to continue the long-term hiring freeze. So, I mean, those items are critical. The board asked us to try and check the special education cut. At one point, we thought we could get $9 million. In reality, after discussions with Dr. Fulcher, it's probably about $4.8 million. So as I walk through this, the line item 12, consistent, you saying cut from central office. This is a continuation of the current year central office cut. So these have been before the board before. I just want to make sure we're not, swayed by other issues. Yeah. Now we get into the Title I requirements. Because of all the deficits above the line, we're looking for options. And I would agree with you, this is a parallel conversation going on right now. Talking to DAC, checking with all of the legalities of it, and trying to come to you with an option here. So that one is truly in the late term parallel observation. But if you get between lines 13 and 18 and get down below that, I think that many of those, 19 through 24, are what the board sees each year as you clear your balances and you validate, are your actual projections over or under? And if you can find ways of balancing the budget and still keep as true as we could to the priority-based budgeting, this is how we do it to get to that deficit down to zero.
Yeah, I'd like to thank staff for your perseverance, for listening to us, and for trying to find some creative solutions that still manage to protect programs like the graduation coaches. This is a Thursday night. It's 7:30, and night after night after night, for months, you have worked on this, and I want to thank you personally. I think that the reductions that you're recommending, I'm still concerned about the 112 positions that we're laying off. I'm not sure which way that's going to go, but I just want to say that I truly appreciate everything that you do. And I think the Title I, while we have had some instances where Title I has come back and it hasn't worked out for us, I believe that this one is probably responsible, and if it can keep our graduation coaches here and keep our eye on the ball of helping lower our dropout rate and increase our graduation rate, I'm in favor of taking that risk as long as we have talked with the DAC. And I'd like to point out that had you gone to the DAC first, we would have criticized you severely for stepping out of line and going out and talking to those folks. But instead, we're going to criticize you for not going and talking to those folks, so I don't know how you win that battle. But I thank you very much for keeping your eye on the ball, for coming up with a very good list of things. I note here on the bottom of one of these pages, which one was it? It says GATE, International Baccalaureate, OSILE, and the majority of magnet funds will be protected in this model. I think that is quite an accomplishment for a school district, as I've gone up to Sacramento and listened to other school districts ask me repeatedly, how have you done what you've done? And I think it was due to the priorities set by this board, but I think it was also due to the efforts and hard work and dedication of the staff of this school district, and you deserve to be talked to in that way. Thank you.
Dr. Rubin?
Yeah, first I just want to echo Ms. Nakamura's comments in terms of my appreciation for what the staff is doing and the fact that it has been very creative and really good work. I also appreciate the fact that this particular piece of paper is just really, the one with the numbers on here up there it's just really clear and understandable. I'm saying sometimes I don't get this or why is this or that. I mean, it's very clear, and that's really helpful. And I know we talk about conservative versus taking risk, and I know that what you were doing was being pragmatic, which was not conservative or risky. It was you were given a task of we need to balance the budget based on where we are at this year, based on all of the different things that happened, and now you need to clean up and balance the budget, and you came up with these solutions. timing is always really difficult in terms of meeting with us, meeting with the DAC, finding out things from the state. It's an imperfect process. Just like these numbers, I mean, in terms of them changing from the state day to day, we can't operate in an environment where we're going to have a static budget and exact timing. We have to really be kind of surfing through the waves and do the best that we can in that. I think it's also important for us on the board to remember that we are looking at all of these potential cuts here to balance the budget that we originally set out to balance. And this is without taking into consideration additional hits from the state that we've looked at on the other page. So while we may not like certain things on here, this is just to get our current our initial projected planned budget rebalanced. And then after that, we're going to have to take some hard looks as far as how we're going, what are we going to do with the other things that happen from the state. So I appreciate this work, and I think also, along with what Ms. Nakamura said, the sensitivity towards keeping as much intact as we can, not just dismantling things. And the graduation coaches is a really good example. So that's it.
No, I completely agree with Catherine and John, and appreciate the hard work that you've done. So I guess now maybe the question, Bill, is what do you need from us for the remainder of this evening?
We had another page there. It's something called the watch list. Phil, did you want to complete that page at this point, or have we covered some of that already with the prior discussion?
The list that you have, the spreadsheet here, is what you asked us for in the sense of some assumptions that we built in for anomalies into the budget that is before you.
These assumptions are built in here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And I hesitate to take time with that unless you have this. It's mostly very, very small numbers, and a lot of it are just the things we had to tweak, so to speak. This next sheet called Solution Summary, I think, is the one that would be of most interest to you because it does provide an alternative method for solving the $16.2 million problem. If you could scroll down, keep going. Yeah, keep going. I'd like to get, because of our time restraints, perhaps get right to the Tier 3 as a potential solution. We met extensively this week with the SIO groups, the academic folks, and quite frankly, this came from that discussion that there is a possibility that we could, in effect, our Tier 3 resources are resources where we have flexibility. They provide resources to the schools in the sense of staff and non-personnel resources that are above the allocation. They are not in the core allocation that is provided to the schools. And what we're presenting to you here is the concept that we could sweep $16.2 million of Tier 3 resources from the school budgets, and then the rest of the Tier 3 dollars would be restored back to them in a way that was consistent with the resources that they get. Some schools get more magnet money. Some schools get more of different kinds of revenue. But the key to this is that these would allow this decision would allow, as number 3 says there, the basic core school site allocation formula to remain intact. We would look since we were directed to look at certificated staffing positions. We would look at reducing the certificated staff that are in those dollars, but also there is a significant amount of non-staff, non-personnel dollars in there as well, which would lessen the impact on the staff. It would not, it would still be an impact to the schools in terms of the non-staff resources that they get, but it would certainly minimize the impact on the staff significantly from the 234 that we presented to you before. We could achieve the necessary savings, and we would not impact the basic staffing. We believe that the SIOs, and the collective group number 7 there, they recommended to us that in so doing that we protect the GATE, the IB, the OSIL, and the majority of magnet funds. Can't say all the magnet funds, but the majority of, I believe there's $8 million of magnet funds in Tier 3, that we could protect those very, very important programs and be able to fund a $16.2 million reduction. If the board is interested in pursuing this, then what we can do is we can provide you between now and next week a detailed summary of the positions, the types of, the specific, not types, but the specific positions that are funded through Tier 3, the types of dollars, although you do have up on line 1, you do have some examples, but there are counselors, there are resource teachers, there are classroom teachers in this, but the net impact on personnel would be much less, and the net impact on the core allocation formula would be 0, because that would be maintained, class size reduction, all of those issues that are part of your priorities would be maintained. These are indeed supplemental dollars, and I don't want to minimize them by calling them supplemental, because they're very important dollars. But if you're interested in this model as opposed to the model that we've been looking at all along, allowing the HR process and all that, with the reductions that you've made in the sense of the pink slips, to hope that would encourage it to happen. If you go back up to the top, the current best thinking of the staff is that if we did it that way with the extraordinarily small number of resignations and leave of absences, that's a tremendous anomaly this year, that we would be short of reaching the goal in that way. But if you are interested in pursuing the Tier 3 reduction, we can certainly provide you greater. The staff's been working today quite a bit on really narrowing down who, what, and where. And we can provide that for you. But I will tell you that it would significantly lessen the impact on staff, but schools would still lose non-personnel resources in this effort, and we can outline for you what each of those would be.
Okay, Mr. DeBeck, and then Ms. Nakamura, and then Ms. Jackson.
I'm going to the last line, number 7, which has to do with OSIL. That's the assumption. This doesn't really say that. This is the OSIL as reduced.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in other words, the option to do this assumes that OSIL as reduced will continue and that there wouldn't be any staffing changes as a result of it. But let's say you go to a half a week OSIL, what you've got is a whole bunch of personnel transfers wrapped around that. Because I can't imagine any OSIL teacher that would want to remain for only part of the time, and then where are they going to go? So then they would say, okay, fill this job with somebody else because I have a full-time job that I have a seniority right to. So the argument would be, if you do this, you're presuming that all the decisions around OSIL are going to stay, but there's no effect on GATE.
The OSIL reduction you'll see on this sheet, we after much consultation, we came up about $380,000 short of the original projection. That reduced program, which is about a 25% reduction, is contained within these assumptions because we have built that into the budget.
Let me clarify, though. We are not touching OSIL. You, the board, have approved an adjustment downward, and we have not changed that decision. We're not even recommending to change that.
No, I understand that downward adjustment is still in play if this if you were going to use this solution, we could use that solution to change the OSIL adjustment as well. I mean, that's a board decision. I understand it. Sure. But the point is, you can't just say it's just an automatic thing that, okay, we're going to solve one problem and leave OSIL alone. We could solve the OSIL problem too. I mean, that's all board judgment. I understand that. But, I mean, this always reminds me of, we're presuming that everything you did is not reversible. But we've already reversed some of the sweeps. Okay. I mean, we know what we did. We took money that was set aside by prudent people in planning their programs to execute their programs. We took it because they hadn't spent it. So now we say we feel guilty, we're going to put it back. Okay, we may even want to feel guilty about something else too. And then we may want to look at that option instead of just presuming that we never make a mistake.
Yeah, I've got a number of questions. Sorry, but my husband's at a dinner for $300 a head without me, so we're doing this tonight, so thought I would text him and tell him to enjoy himself. What percent of personnel would this be left at? We have been, it was interesting, Mr. Kova, you said that this would put us at 90% personnel as opposed to, which is, a formula that's used in accounting. And I know that our previous number was 84%, which is, when you tell that to anyone heading a corporation, it sort of makes their hair stand on end that we're 84% personnel. And I've always been able to justify that. We're not corporations, and people is our people are our business. But interestingly enough, when I went to Sacramento, they also said 90%. So I'm thinking all of you superintendents are getting together and saying 90%. So that's one number I would look for once we've done this. I'd like a real number on what this would leave us as far as personnel ratios are concerned. I don't know that it's going to make too much of a difference, but if that's an easy equation.
We're currently projecting 91 to 92%. Now, that would change based on what happens.
So we would possibly go up to 95% personnel. So people are going to be bringing their own pencils? Okay. Possible to change, is it possible to change this as the retirements come in? Now, I know that in education, these retirements, people don't like to say anything until June that they're retiring because parents get upset and it's just easier. So these numbers will be adjusted. We could adjust these as these retirements come in, possibly.
Certainly.
Hopefully one or two more at least.
Certainly.
We could, right?
Yeah, retirements, resignations.
They can be adjusted.
Right, requests for leaves, extensions, anything that changes in the potential number, it will update.
I don't suppose we've ever tracked that over time in any way, shape, or form on what we can expect.
Sure.
We were able to provide the trend data that we were able to extract from the people's software.
I'm talking about on a day-to-day basis. Do we get a big balloon payment at the end when, is there a big balloon payment on, what is it, the date today, June 16th this year? Mm-hmm. When people suddenly give in their retirements or whatever, or do we have...
Sure.
I realize we can't responsibly gauge, but we can make those adjustments as those come in, right?
Yes, and the adjustments can be done. With regards to taking a look in previous years, when was it that we would have received the notices? That was kind of hard to figure out because it's based on the effective date of the resignation. So the way it's recorded is that the paperwork comes in and then it's processed into the system with the effective date future dated. However, normal trends would be that normally people that are looking for retirements would have their appointments in February, March, early on with STRS, and they will begin to plan. By June, then we would start receiving the final notices. Do people hang on to them? Absolutely. They can come over the summer, July, August.
When we had in February, did we, and I know you're fairly new to the district, but do we have any sense of whether or not February had the normal number of people at those meetings or not? or was that also down?
I don't know in terms of the retired meetings. That certainly would be an indicator. One of the documents, one of the information that we did take a look at is who in the system is age eligible for retirement along with the years of experience. And those numbers were, of course, low, given the fact that there was a CERP offered last year. So even within the system, who may be eligible within the teaching ranks, it was a low number.
No, we do realize that's going to be a low number, but it's still, hope springs eternal. And,
absolutely.
So
anything
it's one
can
possibility.
happen.
And then I guess what I am interested in this with regard to Tier 3, but we used to do 2x2x1s or whatever. I'd like an opportunity to talk with someone about this, at my own level, rather than taking up a lot of time up here on the dais before I make a decision. If that'd be possible, I'd appreciate that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Evans.
Okay, just going over the same page, I think one thing I just wanted to point out was we talked about the cuts that you came up with on the longer sheet over here, and what were the other options. I think it was kind of embedded in here the things the other options, but they're options that we don't want to consider, and that's, I think, the consensus of the board anyway, which is GATE, IB, OSIL, magnet, and so forth. I mean, that's built into all of what you're doing, and I think that's pretty explicit, so that's good. The key thing that we just have to remember when we're discussing about the $16 million, and I know Catherine said she wanted to get more information on it, and I've looked at numbers and added and subtracting. I know it's complicated, but the one basic thing I've always come back to is layoffs do not save any money. Elimination of positions saves money, because if you lay off the Doyle first grade teacher, they still have to have somebody teach that class. We didn't say we're changing the class size of first grade or anything like that. So that, I think, was part of the problem, that we didn't eliminate the positions in the first place. And then the result is that the 112 that we have, that we gave the layoff notices to, are not necessarily the order and the ones we would have laid off if we had started first with saying these are the types of positions that we're eliminating, because we go through the particular kinds of service. So what we're saving the money through is laying off a certain number of positions, and then I understand the problem after that, where the 16 million could be dinged, is if we remove certain chairs and then we have certain teachers left standing without a funded position. But it's really interesting when Catherine was referring to there's not the day-to-day information, but when you look at the year-to-year information, the number of temporary teachers, after all the cuts we made last year and 600 fewer teachers, the number of temporary teachers we had last year is almost identical to the number of temporary teachers this year. The number of probationary first and second year teachers we had last year is almost identical to this year, which is really interesting to me, because it seemed to me on the probationary we had 550 the year before, 600 this year. I didn't think we were hiring very many teachers. I'm assuming that the first year's probationary teachers became second year and the second years became permanents. So the point there is that there are a lot of temporary and permanent teachers. And then going back to the issue, again, that Catherine was referring to on attrition, if we took the lowest number in the last several years, or the worst case scenario, it would the lowest was 218 a couple of years ago. I know we're at 22 right now, but it's even after CERP, other years, it's never so. What the problem is, we don't have the statistics on when people are doing this. Are people waiting until the last day of school to say they're not coming back next year? Are they waiting to decide for family reasons about taking a leave or not a leave? That's a pretty big number. And then the other issue is in terms of, well, I won't go into that right now. There's a lot of other factors here. So that is the issue, that we need to save the $16 million by eliminating positions. And we have to project. We can't just say how many people have retired or resigned or asked for leave on a certain day. We have to project. Because in the same way, we have to project how many students we're going to have this year. We have no guarantee. We are doing all these statistical analyses to come up with projections. We're not just saying how many people are there right now or anything. And so the same situation with our teachers. We have a certain number of teachers, and we have to project very, very conservatively, but still, how many are going to resign, how many are going to ask for leaves. And I think when you do that, you'll see that, number one, that there aren't people left standing that there aren't chairs for, and number two, that even if that were the case, it's not necessarily matching up with 112, because in the 112 are included language teachers, music teachers, AP teachers, things that we're not doing away with. So I think this is really good information. I think this other information on what happened year to year is really good for us to take into consideration. But once again, I think that you have done a really excellent job of outlining what are the possibilities in a very short period of time.
Superintendent.
Thank you, President Brewer.
I'm sorry, Ms. Shell.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've been cut out for the night. That's okay. But anyway, a couple of things. Number one, I'm not saying that our staff is not hardworking and they're not creative. I know you put in a lot of hours. So don't take my questioning as a negative. I think that a board member is responsible for asking critical questions, because our constituents are going to expect us to ask those questions. And people may choose maybe not to ask those questions, but I'm always going to ask those questions, because I feel accountable to people to ask those questions, because they have those questions, whether we want to believe that or not. They have those questions of our staff, and they're watching, and when I get home I will have questions for them, and hopefully I've answered all of them before I've gotten home. But when we talk about the Title III funding, I think that we do need to have more of an understanding as to what that is. I heard you say that is there's non-staff type of materials, and if it's materials, that may be one thing, but if it is personnel, it becomes another, because what we're doing is we're shifting from one group of staff members to another group of staff members, and we don't want to do that either. And just by the title of some of these, I'm looking if this is the TIC Brock grant and second language and high school exit exam, if these are people that are doing work for those students, that it becomes that we're shifting it to another group of people, and certainly I hope that is not the intention. If the intention again is for us to eliminate these 200 and so odd positions and the certificated staff, then we have to find a way to do that the correct way. And whether we use those funds or not, it's okay, but we need to make sure that we come to a decision that is going to be one that we can live with in the long run, and that is always my concern, is that making sure that in the long run we can live with it. Dr. Evans is correct, and the reason I have been so adamant about not laying off teachers is because we hire them right back. Because when the kids show up, guess what? We need the teachers. But if we're eliminating certificated positions, and maybe it's what should have happened first with identification of those positions in the least impact on the district. So then it would have been easier for us to say we know where that $16.2 million is coming from. So I think that I look forward to having the conversation about the Title III categorical fund, whether you do it 2 by 2 by 1 or 1 on 1, however you do it. I'm looking forward to having that conversation.
The Tier 3 funding, I want to describe it for just a moment here for the board. This is categorical funding that was converted to flexibility. These are above core positions. And what we're seeking to do here to minimize the staffing input is to eliminate the equivalent of $16.2 million, whatever that is in the number of positions. It's not people walking out the door. We're going to move these people into other non-Tier 3 positions, but we do need to eliminate some number of above core positions, even though they may be valued. And I know that for a case, if we're going to plug that hole, and the board did agree that we were going to find $16.2 million. So we're going to protect the core, and we're going to move these people into core or other positions, but out of this funding. So we need this funding to help balance the budget.
But, okay. Mm-hmm. Tier 3 money isn't all teacher money.
No, it's not.
So the solution you're offering is teacher solution, but it isn't a district solution in terms of the tasks we have before us or whether or not, we need this money wherever we need it. And so if the proposal is to use Tier 1 to overstaff, Tier 3 to overstaff, or to create smaller class sizes in certain places because it's Tier 1 fundable, it doesn't mean that we couldn't use that money for other kinds of services because money doesn't, you can use the money in another way for Tier 1 and release, I'll call it general fund dollars for any purpose. That's what you're doing anyway. So, I'm not going to just say the only solution to the use of Tier 1 is just to alleviate, I'll call it layoffs, or to alleviate a problem for a mismatch of the number of people we have for the jobs we project by formula. I think we better have to use it as a budget solution rather than a teacher budget solution. And I see this as only as presented as only a teacher budget solution. And I'm not against that, but I think the discussion has to be broader than that because it has to do with district needs generally, and whatever. We could argue, I'm not going to try and match up one job's value against another. I think we need to talk, though, that way in terms of whether we use our resources for helping in the library or overstaffing the schools with teachers.
Okay. No further questions or comments for tonight from board members? Anything to conclude, Superintendent?
Going upstairs?
We will be back, I believe, next week. I think that Cheryl is working with the board to schedule our workshop to come to some closure on these items so that we can build the first reading on the 8th of June.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Phil. Yeah.
Great.